Grace Carson sat in the waiting room of her local clinic, her eyes fixed on the sleek new device sitting in the corner of the room. It wasn't just another medical tool. This was something that looked more like a robot than a traditional diagnostic machine. A soft hum emanated from it, almost as if it were alive, as a small screen flickered on and off. At 72, Grace had seen a lot in her life. She'd witnessed the evolution of medicine from humble beginnings to the high-tech marvels of today. Yet, this was something entirely new, and something she wasn't sure she could trust. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, glancing around. The other patients in the room didn't seem fazed by the machine. Some were chatting, others were scrolling through their phones, as if the buzzing of a robot in the corner was the most normal thing in the world. Grace, however, felt a growing unease. This wasn't the world she had grown up in. It wasn't just about the advances in medicine. It was about technology, and Grace had always been a little skeptical of technology. A voice interrupted her thoughts, breaking the silence. "Grace Carson?" the nurse called, her tone warm but professional. Grace stood up, smoothing her cardigan. "That's me," she said, a bit too loudly for her liking. As she walked toward the nurse, she noticed that the device, the one that had sparked such anxiety within her, was still active, its lights flashing in an almost rhythmic dance. The nurse led Grace down the hallway, past several other machines, each one more advanced than the last. At the end of the hall, the nurse stopped outside a door and turned toward Grace with a smile. "Dr. Andrews is ready for you. But before you go in, I just wanted to let you know something. We're introducing some new tech here. You may notice it around. Don't worry, it's all part of our new approach." Dr. Andrews believes that technology is the future of healthcare, especially for people like you. Grace's eyebrows furrowed. "People like me? You know, seniors. The ones who need more care and attention. It's all about making healthcare easier, more efficient, and more accessible." Grace nodded, though she wasn't sure she agreed. Technology was great. When it worked, of course, but she'd seen too many stories on the news about things going wrong, about people being hurt or misdiagnosed because of machines. This whole thing just felt wrong. "Thank you, dear," she said as she entered the examination room, not fully sure what to expect. Inside the room, Dr. Andrews was already waiting for her. A tall man in his late 40s, his calm demeanor put her at ease. He greeted her with a firm handshake and a smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Carson. How are we feeling today?" "Oh, you know," she replied, settling into the chair. Same old, same old. My back's been bothering me more, and my blood sugar's been acting up. Nothing new." Dr. Andrews nodded, taking notes. He then motioned toward the device Grace had noticed earlier. "I see you've noticed our new assistant in the waiting room," he said, his tone light. "I know it can seem a little futuristic, but I assure you, it's something that's going to change how we treat our patients." Grace followed his gaze, her eyes narrowing. "That thing," she said, a bit too harshly. "I don't know about all this. I've been to enough doctors over the years. I don't trust machines to do the work of real people." Dr. Andrews chuckled softly, setting down his pen. "I understand your concerns, Grace. Believe me, I do. But let me explain. That machine, actually, it's more of a system, uses AI and data analytics to assist in diagnosing conditions more accurately than even the most experienced doctors could. Think of it as a second pair of eyes, but a pair that never gets tired, never misses a detail." "AI," Grace repeated, her voice skeptical. "And you think that's going to help me more than a real doctor?" "Not more than a doctor," Dr. Andrews clarified, "but alongside. Think about it. The data we have on health these days is overwhelming. It's hard to process it all in a short appointment. But with AI, we can analyze it quickly and pinpoint issues that might otherwise be missed. It's not about replacing people. It's about enhancing care." Grace folded her arms, unconvinced. "And what happens if something goes wrong? What if that machine makes a mistake?" "That's a valid question," Dr. Andrews said, his tone serious. "But the beauty of this system is that it's not a standalone decision-maker. It works in collaboration with doctors. If there's ever a concern or a red flag, We catch it together." Grace's mind was racing. She understood what he was saying, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't natural. She had lived a life where personal connection, human touch, and trust in doctors had meant everything. Now, suddenly, it seemed like that was being replaced by cold, impersonal technology. Dr. Andrews leaned forward, noticing her hesitation. "I know it's a lot to take in, but I promise you, this is a step toward improving your care, especially as we age. And as far as your concerns about your diabetes and heart health, this technology might just be the tool we need to help manage them better." "I suppose I'll just have to see," Grace said, still unsure. Dr. Andrews smiled. "Exactly. And I'll be here to help guide you through it." As the appointment continued, Grace couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the world was moving faster than she could keep up with. The world she knew, the world of personal care and face-to-face relationships with doctors, seemed like it was slipping away, replaced by machines and algorithms. But maybe, just maybe, Dr. Andrews was right. Maybe these new technologies could be the answer to living a longer, healthier life. Maybe they weren't as frightening as they seemed. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Grace Carson had always prided herself on being independent. Raised in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania, she grew up on a farm, where hard work and resilience were the backbone of her life. At 72, Grace had seen the world change in ways she never could have imagined. The once familiar fields where she ran barefoot as a child were now dotted with strip malls and housing developments. The telephone poles that once lined the dirt road leading to her family home now supported modern power lines, providing energy to the many homes that had sprung up like wildflowers. Her life had been anything but easy, but she was proud of the strength that had gotten her through. She'd married her high school sweetheart, James, and together they built a life filled with love, laughter, and hard-earned memories. But after James passed away 5 years ago, the house that once echoed with the sounds of two people in love grew quiet. Grace found herself spending her days alone, surrounded by the memories of a life that seemed to belong to someone else now. She had 2 children, both busy with their own families and careers, and while she loved them dearly, she often felt that the world was moving faster than she could keep up with. Grace had always been healthy, despite the occasional aches and pains that came with getting older. But recently, she'd noticed her body was beginning to slow down. The diabetes that she had managed fairly well for years had started to cause more issues. She was also battling high blood pressure and fatigue that seemed to come out of nowhere. Despite taking medication and visiting her doctor regularly, she couldn't help but feel like she was losing control. It was one of these visits to her doctor's office that had led her to today, to the cold, sterile waiting room filled with flashing lights and new technology that she didn't understand. The very thought of it made her uneasy. Grace was a creature of habit. She didn't need robots or artificial intelligence to make decisions about her health. She needed real, human care. She needed someone who understood her, someone who could look into her eyes and tell her what was wrong. Not some machine with a blinking screen. But here she was, about to face that very machine. As Grace sat back in the examination room, waiting for Dr. Andrews to return, she couldn't help but reflect on the changes she had seen over the years. Technology had always seemed like a distant world, something reserved for the younger generations. When she was growing up, the most advanced piece of technology in the house was the radio. And then there was the television, a luxury that was often broken or turned off because they couldn't afford to keep it on all day. It wasn't until she entered adulthood that things like microwave ovens and fax machines made their way into the world. She was still amazed at how quickly things had changed, especially when it came to healthcare. Dr. Andrews had mentioned the new technology briefly, but it didn't ease her concerns. The idea of using artificial intelligence to diagnose or treat a condition sounded more like science fiction than reality. And yet, she had to admit, the doctor seemed genuinely excited about it. He had told her that this technology would be able to detect things that might otherwise be missed, helping to prevent serious health issues before they became life-threatening. But it was hard to shake her skepticism. Her mind wandered back to her own experience with healthcare. Over the years, she had developed a close relationship with her general practitioner, Dr. McKinley. He knew her inside and out. He knew about the time she'd been hospitalized after the birth of her first child. He knew about the difficult times during her battle with breast cancer a decade ago. And, most recently, he had been helping her manage her diabetes and heart health. Dr. McKinley had been a constant in her life, always there when she needed him. He was someone she trusted with her health and the thought of relying on a machine, something that couldn't possibly understand her life and her history, felt like a betrayal. Machines didn't ask how she was feeling. They didn't give her the comfort of knowing someone cared enough to listen. But as Dr. Andrews had explained, the world was changing, and it seemed like the healthcare system was evolving faster than she could keep up. Just then, the door opened, and Dr. Andrews walked back in, holding a tablet in his hand. "All set, Grace. How are you feeling about everything so far?" Grace gave a small sigh. "I'm not sure. It just feels wrong. I've been seeing doctors my whole life, and it's always been about talking to someone who knows me, who understands what I'm going through. I'm not sure a machine can do that." Dr. Andrews smiled reassuringly and sat down next to her. "I understand, and it's completely normal to feel that way. But this machine, this technology, doesn't replace the human touch. It works with us, not instead of us. It helps us see things more clearly, catch things earlier, and give you the best possible care. It's a tool that can help make your life easier, Grace, but it can't replace your doctor's care or the relationship we've built with you." Grace nodded, her heart softening a little. She could see the sincerity in his eyes. He believed in this, and maybe that's what she needed to do, trust him. It wasn't the technology itself that was the problem. It was the idea of not being heard, of being lost in a sea of algorithms and data. But if Dr. Andrews was right, if this technology could truly help her, then maybe it was worth trying. "I guess we'll see," she said with a small smile. "I'm not ready to jump in with both feet yet, but I'll keep an open mind." Dr. Andrews gave a gentle nod. "That's all I ask. We'll take it one step at a time. You're not alone in this." Grace left the clinic that day with a lot on her mind. As she walked to her car, she couldn't help but wonder how her world would look if she truly embraced this new technology. Could it really help her live a healthier, longer life? Could it help her stay connected to the people she loved, even if the world around her was changing at an overwhelming pace? She wasn't sure yet, but she did know one thing. The world was moving forward, and if she wanted to keep up, she'd have to take that first step. Grace Carson had never been one to shy away from challenges, but she had always approached life at her own pace. And as she sat in the parking lot of her doctor's office, staring at the clinic in front of her, she couldn't shake the feeling that the world around her was moving far faster than she could keep up. The thought of relying on new technology, especially in something as personal as her health, still felt unsettling. Over the next few days, Grace found herself thinking more and more about what Dr. Andrews had said. The AI, the robotics, the diagnostic tools, these weren't just buzzwords thrown around in a conversation. They were real, and they were coming. Whether she liked it or not, technology was slowly weaving itself into every corner of her life. And now, it was being introduced into her healthcare routine. She had heard about the rise of telemedicine, virtual doctor's appointments, and remote consultations over the past few years, but she'd always dismissed it. It felt too impersonal, too detached. She valued the face-to-face connection, the quiet moments where her doctor looked her in the eye and made her feel heard. To her, that was what healing was all about. Human touch, empathy, understanding. The idea of a robot, or even an AI, taking the place of that was too much for her to accept. Yet, despite her reluctance, there was a small part of Grace that couldn't help but wonder if Dr. Andrews had a point. Could this technology really make her health journey easier? Could it offer her the kind of care that had been elusive for so long? That Saturday afternoon, Grace met her daughter, Emily, at a local cafe for lunch. Emily had always been the more tech-savvy of the two. A lawyer with a busy schedule, Emily had embraced technology long before Grace ever did. Emily was constantly talking about the benefits of digital tools, everything from smart home devices to the latest apps that tracked health metrics. "Mom, I think you're overthinking this," Emily said as they sipped their coffee. "I mean, what's the big deal about a little extra help? Dr. Andrews is right. This could make things so much easier for you. The AI can help monitor your blood sugar levels, remind you to take your meds, and even help track your heart rate. Grace frowned. But it's a machine, Em. A machine can't replace a doctor's care. It doesn't care about me the way a human does. Emily's expression softened. I get it, Mom. You've always been old school about things. But remember, the technology doesn't replace people. It enhances what doctors can already do for you. It's like using a calculator instead of doing math by hand. Just makes everything faster and more accurate. Grace folded her hands over her coffee cup, unconvinced. It just doesn't feel right, Emily. What happens when something goes wrong? What if it misdiagnoses me or misses something important? Emily leaned in, her tone sincere. Look, I know change is hard, but think of it this way. The AI isn't making the final decisions. It's giving your doctor more information, helping them see things they might have missed. You've been going to the doctor for years, and this is just the next step. You don't have to trust it all at once. Just let it be a tool, not a replacement. Grace thought for a moment. She had always trusted Emily's judgment, but something about the idea of placing her health in the hands of technology still made her uneasy. I don't know, Em. I've been doing this my whole life, and I'm still not sure I'm ready to let go. Emily smiled warmly, placing a hand on her mother's. Mom, no one's asking you to let go. You don't have to stop seeing your doctor or giving them your trust. Just let technology help make your life a little easier. Grace gave a small, hesitant nod. Emily's words stuck with her, but her fears remained. What if this was all just a trend, a fleeting phase that would cause more harm than good? What if this technology could never replace the care, the compassion, and the personal connection she had always valued? The next week, Grace's fears began to materialize in a way she hadn't expected. She arrived at Dr. Andrews' clinic for her regular checkup, where she was scheduled to try out the new health monitoring system for the first time. Grace wasn't sure what to expect, but she had hoped for something familiar. Instead, she was led into a small room where a large screen took up one entire wall. Beside it stood the same robotic assistant she had seen during her first visit, the one that hummed and blinked like it was waiting for her to make a decision. Dr. Andrews greeted her with his usual warm smile. Good to see you again, Grace. Ready to give it a try? Grace hesitated before replying. I suppose so, but I'm not sure about this. It all just feels too much. Totally understandable, Dr. Andrews said. It's a big shift, but remember, we're here to support you through this. We're not going to just hand you over to a machine. Think of this as a partner in your healthcare. Grace looked at the robotic assistant. It was sleek, with smooth edges and a soft, glowing light that pulsed like a heartbeat. It was designed to track her vital signs, collect data, and even suggest lifestyle changes based on the information it gathered. All right, Grace, Dr. Andrews said as he tapped a few keys on the computer. Let's start by connecting your health data to the system. We'll run a few simple tests, nothing invasive, and see how it reads your vitals. Just take a seat here, and the machine will do the rest. Reluctantly, Grace sat in the chair that faced the screen, still unsure of what she was doing. The assistant whirred to life, and a soft voice came through the speakers. Hello, Grace Carson. Please relax and remain still. I will begin monitoring your health data now. The screen displayed her heart rate, blood pressure, and other metrics, all of which seemed to be within a healthy range. Grace watched, feeling a sense of detachment as the system silently analyzed her information. This is odd, Grace muttered to herself. Dr. Andrews chuckled softly. I know it feels strange, but the system is designed to help us keep track of everything in real time. The more data we have, the better we can manage your care. And remember, we'll always be here to interpret the results together. The machine beeped as it finished collecting her data, and the screen shifted to show a summary of her health status. The robotic assistant highlighted areas of concern, such as the slight increase in her blood sugar and her elevated cholesterol levels. The screen offered lifestyle suggestions, including dietary changes and a reminder to increase her daily exercise. Grace couldn't help but feel a little impressed by how accurate the system seemed. But the feeling was quickly overshadowed by her lingering unease. It was one thing to see the data. It was another to accept that the machine might know more about her health than she did. I can't decide if I should be relieved or worried, Grace said, her voice wavering. I don't know what's happening. This feels like I'm just a number in a system. Dr. Andrews met her gaze with understanding. It's normal to feel this way. Technology like this is meant to support us, not replace the care you've always known. Think of it as an extra layer of protection. It gives us more insight into what's going on with your health, so we can catch things earlier. But Grace wasn't so sure. As the screen flickered and flashed with more data, she couldn't shake the feeling that, in this new world of medical technology, she was losing something crucial, something that couldn't be measured in numbers or data points. The following weeks felt like a blur to Grace. Every visit to the clinic, every scan, every test seemed to reinforce her conflicting feelings about the new health technology. She was still struggling to accept the fact that this new system, this AI-driven health monitor, was not just a trend, it was here to stay. Dr. Andrews had assured her that the machine wasn't meant to replace human care, but each time she interacted with it, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was slipping away. One evening, after a particularly long day of dealing with her diabetes and adjusting to her new medication regimen, Grace sat alone at the kitchen table. The familiar scent of coffee filled the air as she sipped from her favorite mug, watching the soft light from the kitchen lamp flicker. Her mind raced with thoughts of her late husband, James, and the quiet simplicity of the life they had shared. Back then, things were so much easier. Healthcare wasn't something you had to overthink. A visit to the doctor was a routine event, something that required little more than a conversation and a diagnosis. Now, it felt like every decision was being made by algorithms, and she wasn't sure how to handle it. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a text from Emily, her daughter. "How's it going with the AI, Mom? You feeling more comfortable with it?" Grace sighed. She hadn't yet answered Emily's last few texts. To be honest, she didn't really want to talk about it. But Emily was persistent, and Grace appreciated that. She didn't want to shut her daughter out, but she also didn't want to admit how lost she felt. "It's been interesting," Grace replied cautiously. "I'm still not sure what to think. It's just so impersonal. I'm not sure I want to trust a machine with my health." A few seconds later, Emily responded, "I get it, Mom. But remember, it's not just the AI that's helping you. It's your whole care team. And the AI is just another way to make sure they catch everything, so you get the best care possible." Grace stared at the screen for a moment, tapping her fingers on the table. It was hard to explain to Emily how uncomfortable she felt with everything changing so fast. She had always prided herself on making informed decisions about her health, relying on her intuition and the knowledge of doctors she trusted. But now she was being asked to put her faith in a machine that, despite being well-intentioned, felt foreign and cold. Could this really be the future of healthcare? The next day, as she sat in Dr. Andrews' office once again, she couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that had taken over her. The robotic assistant sat in the corner of the room, its glowing light flickering gently. The screen had already greeted her in its usual soft, mechanical voice, reminding her to stay still while it collected her data. But Grace wasn't paying attention to the machine this time. She was focused on Dr. Andrews, who was scrolling through the data the system had gathered. He smiled at her, but his eyes told a different story. He seemed pleased with the results, but Grace could tell he wasn't entirely at ease either. "Grace, the AI has caught something in your test results that I didn't expect," Dr. Andrews said, setting the tablet down and looking at her intently. "Your blood sugar levels are higher than usual. You're also showing some signs of heart strain that we need to keep an eye on." Grace's stomach tightened. "I thought my blood sugar was under control. And my heart. I've been feeling fine. Are you sure about this?" Dr. Andrews nodded, his voice gentle but firm. "I know it's hard to accept, but this is exactly what I've been talking about. The AI picked up on subtle changes in your vitals that we might have missed in a regular exam. If we hadn't noticed this, you could have been at serious risk down the line." Grace's heart pounded in her chest. The fear she had been pushing away, fear that this new technology could actually be helping her, was now settling in. "So, what do we do about it? How can I fix this?" "Well, the first step is to make some changes in your diet and lifestyle," Dr. Andrews said. "The AI also flagged your sleep patterns, and it looks like you're not getting as much rest as you should be. We'll need to monitor your glucose levels more closely over the next few weeks. And I want you to try a more structured exercise regimen." Grace absorbed his words, feeling a strange mixture of relief and unease. The machine had spotted something she hadn't even noticed in herself, and now, for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had an action plan. But the deeper question still lingered. How much of this was the result of the machine? How much of it was her own willpower and determination? Dr. Andrews leaned back in his chair, watching her carefully. Grace, I know this is a lot to take in, but you have to admit, this technology is offering us a level of insight we didn't have before. It's helping us see the bigger picture, and it's making sure that we don't miss anything crucial. Grace looked at the machine, its glowing light now more reassuring than intimidating. I don't know if I can ever fully trust it, she admitted, but I can't deny that it's showing me things I need to pay attention to. Maybe it's not so bad. Dr. Andrews smiled. It's okay to be cautious. I understand completely. But Grace, the most important thing is that you're still here. We've caught this early, and now we can take action. We're working together on this. The AI is just a tool. Your health, your choices, they're what matter most. Later that evening, as Grace sat at her kitchen table once more, she reflected on everything that had happened. The AI hadn't just provided data, it had provided insight that could potentially save her life. But more importantly, it had forced her to confront her own resistance to change, something she had always been wary of. She had spent so many years resisting the unknown, fearing what lay ahead. But now, she realized, maybe it was time to accept that change wasn't something to fear. It was a chance to grow, to adapt, and to live with a greater understanding of her own body and mind. The road ahead was still uncertain, but Grace had learned something important today. Technology wasn't the enemy. It was the bridge to the future of healthcare, one that, with her active participation, could help her live the rest of her life with greater awareness, better care, and more hope. The following morning, she started her new exercise routine. It wasn't easy, but she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: determination. She might not have been ready to fully embrace all the changes technology was bringing, but she was beginning to trust it, just enough to give it a chance. A month had passed since Grace had started using the AI-assisted health monitoring system. Despite her initial reluctance, she had come to accept the new routine, and even though she still struggled with moments of doubt, there was no denying that her health had improved. Her blood sugar levels had stabilized, and she had lost a few pounds, thanks to the exercise plan the system had tailored for her. Dr. Andrews had been pleased with her progress, and Emily had noticed the changes too. But there was a nagging feeling in the back of Grace's mind, an unease that seemed to grow with each passing day. It wasn't about the AI anymore. It was about something else. The feeling that her life was being increasingly guided by algorithms, that every choice she made was being shaped by data she didn't fully understand, had begun to feel more overwhelming than comforting. Grace had always prided herself on being in control of her own destiny. She was the one who made the decisions about her health, her life, her future. But now, for the first time, it seemed as though someone, or something, else was pulling the strings. It was a crisp Friday morning when Grace got the call. "Ms. Carson, this is Dr. Andrews. I need to speak with you about some recent results from your latest scans. It's important we go over them as soon as possible." The urgency in his voice sent a ripple of anxiety through her. She had gotten used to the routine, the check-ins, the monitoring. She'd even come to trust the system, despite her reservations. But the tone of Dr. Andrews' voice was different this time. "I'll be there in an hour," she said quickly, already grabbing her jacket. When she arrived at the clinic, Dr. Andrews was waiting for her in his office, his face more serious than she had ever seen it. The robotic assistant was silent in the corner, its lights dimmed as if it, too, sensed the gravity of the situation. "Sit down, Grace," Dr. Andrews said gently, guiding her toward the chair. His demeanor had shifted from the usual warmth to something more guarded, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. She took a seat and immediately noticed the tablet in front of him. It was filled with detailed reports, graphs, and numbers, most of which Grace couldn't even begin to understand. The AI had been tracking her health meticulously, and the results were overwhelming. "Grace, I need to be very transparent with you," Dr. Andrews began, his voice steady but full of concern. "The AI has flagged something significant in your scans that we didn't expect. I wish I could say this is just another routine finding, but it's not. Your recent tests show signs of early-stage heart failure. Grace's world tilted. She felt as if the air had been knocked out of her chest. Heart failure? She had felt fine, better than she had in years. Sure, there had been some fatigue here and there, but nothing that screamed serious health issues. What do you mean, heart failure? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Dr. Andrews looked at her with soft eyes. It's not acute, but it's concerning. Your heart is showing signs of strain that weren't visible in previous scans. The AI picked up on it earlier than we might have through traditional methods. If we hadn't caught this now, it could have progressed to something more dangerous. Grace sat there, the words reverberating in her mind, each one heavier than the last. Heart failure. It sounded so final, so irreparable. It wasn't a disease you just got over. Dr. Andrews, I don't understand, she managed. I've been feeling fine. The system. I've been doing everything it told me. How could this happen? The AI didn't cause this, Grace, he said, leaning forward. In fact, it helped us catch this in time. But your condition, while manageable now, is something we need to address immediately. The data shows that your heart has been under stress for a while, and while you've been doing well with the exercise and lifestyle changes, the damage has already started. We need to start treatment right away. Tears stung the back of Grace's eyes, but she fought them back. The AI had warned her, had given her the opportunity to take control of her health, and yet here she was, facing a diagnosis she wasn't prepared for. Grace, I know this is overwhelming, Dr. Andrews continued, but we caught it early. We have options. Medication, lifestyle changes, maybe even a procedure down the line. The most important thing is that we act quickly. You're not alone in this. Later that evening, after the news had settled into the depths of her mind, Grace sat in the dimly lit living room of her house, staring out the window at the quiet street. Her mind was racing with thoughts she couldn't fully process. She had always prided herself on being strong, on handling life's challenges with grace and resilience. But this felt different. Heart failure. It wasn't something you could just fight through. The weight of the diagnosis sat heavy on her chest, and for the first time in a long while, she wasn't sure how to move forward. Her phone buzzed again, snapping her back to reality. It was a message from Emily. Mom, I know today's been a lot. Just wanted to check in. Are you okay? Grace stared at the text for a long moment, feeling the familiar wave of love and support from her daughter. Emily had always been her anchor, the one who pushed her when she needed to move forward, and the one who held her when the world felt too heavy. Grace quickly typed back, Not sure, Em. The AI found something in my heart, something I never saw coming. I'm scared. She waited for a response, unsure of what to expect. But within seconds, Emily replied, I'm so sorry, Mom, but I know you. I know you're strong enough to get through this. You're not alone in this fight, and you don't have to do it alone. We'll figure this out together. You've got this. The words brought a brief comfort, but they also brought with them the realization that she was at a crossroads. The world of healthcare that she had once trusted, one built on doctors, empathy, and human connection, was no longer enough. Technology, for better or worse, had become an integral part of her life, and it was forcing her to confront not just her health, but her relationship with it. The AI had caught the issue with her heart before it could have spiraled into something worse. It had been a blessing, a gift in disguise. But now, as Grace stood at the precipice of a new chapter in her health journey, she had to ask herself, was she ready to fully accept this new era of healthcare, or would she continue to resist it, despite its undeniable potential? The next few weeks were a blur of doctor visits, more tests, and a growing sense of urgency to address the heart issues Dr. Andrews had uncovered. Grace was diligently following the AI-recommended exercise regimen, adjusting her diet, and staying on top of the medications. The lifestyle changes felt hard at first, especially since she had always been an independent woman who made her own decisions. But she was learning to trust the process. The anxiety still lingered, but it was gradually being replaced by a quiet determination. Grace couldn't deny it anymore. The technology had been right. The AI had not only saved her life, but had also provided her with the tools to take control of her health in ways she never could have imagined before. It wasn't just about the tests or the scans. It was about the ability to act early, to understand her body in real time, and to make informed choices that aligned with her goals. One evening, as she sat at her kitchen table sipping a cup of herbal tea, her mind wandered back to the first time she had heard about the AI system. The fear, the doubt, the discomfort. It all seemed so distant now. She had come so far in a short time, and yet there was still a part of her that couldn't fully embrace it. The road ahead wasn't guaranteed. Heart failure was not something you just fixed with a few pills and healthy habits. But for the first time, Grace could see a way forward, a path where she wasn't just a passive recipient of medical care, but an active participant in her own well-being. She was learning to adapt, to grow, and most importantly, to accept that change, no matter how unsettling, was sometimes exactly what was needed for a better future. As Grace continued on her journey of healing, she felt a shift not only in her body but in her mind as well. The discomfort of relying on technology had started to fade, and now, she was finding peace in the knowledge that she had the support of both the AI system and her human doctors. The healthcare world had evolved, and she was evolving with it. But Grace knew that there would always be challenges. There would always be moments of doubt. The fear of the unknown, the fear of not being in control, would still be a part of her. But she had learned something invaluable over the past few months. Control wasn't always about making every decision yourself. Sometimes it was about knowing when to ask for help, when to trust the experts, whether human or machine, and when to let go of the fear that held you back. As Grace sat in Dr. Andrews' office one final time, the results of her latest tests were in. The AI system had been monitoring her heart health closely, and the numbers were encouraging. Her heart was showing signs of improvement, and the strain she had been experiencing seemed to be diminishing. It wasn't a complete cure, but it was a significant step forward. "Grace," Dr. Andrews said, his voice warm and filled with relief, "I'm pleased to tell you that the treatment plan is working. Your heart is stabilizing. The AI has really helped us pinpoint the exact areas we needed to focus on, and it's clear that we've made the right adjustments." Grace looked at him, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over her. She had come into this journey feeling overwhelmed and uncertain, but now, as she sat in the doctor's office, she could see a future she hadn't allowed herself to imagine before. "I couldn't have done this without the AI," she said quietly. "It caught things I never would have noticed. It's like it saw the bigger picture when I was just focused on the small details." Dr. Andrews smiled, nodding. "Exactly. It's not replacing your doctors or your instincts. It's simply another tool, an incredibly powerful one, that's helping us make better decisions together. You're not just reacting to your health anymore, Grace. You're being proactive." Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from the moment. It was Emily. "How's it going, Mom? Did you get the results yet?" Grace smiled and typed back a quick response. "Yes, I did. The news is good. The AI really helped us find a way to turn things around. I'm on the mend." As she hit send, she felt a profound sense of peace. The journey was far from over. There would still be challenges ahead, and the future would hold more unknowns than certainties. But for the first time in a long while, Grace felt that she had the tools, the support, and the strength to face whatever came next. Later that evening, as Grace sat with Emily at the kitchen table, the two of them laughing over a glass of wine, she realized something that had eluded her for months. This wasn't just about healthcare. This wasn't just about AI, technology, or even the medicine. This was about life, about relationships, about community, about the willingness to evolve. It was about not being afraid of what was new, even when it felt unfamiliar or uncomfortable. And it was about learning that true strength didn't come from knowing everything. It came from being open to learning, from being willing to embrace change, and from trusting that, no matter how tough it got, there was always a way forward. "I'm proud of you, Mom," Emily said, breaking into Grace's thoughts. "You've been through so much, and you're still standing." Grace smiled, her heart swelling with love for her daughter. "I've learned a lot, Em, and I think I'm finally ready to accept that the future of healthcare isn't something to be afraid of. It's something to embrace." As they clinked their glasses together, Grace couldn't help but feel that, for the first time in a long while, everything was going to be okay. A few months had passed since Grace's health had stabilized. The early panic had subsided, and she was learning to live with her condition, balancing her treatment with the AI-assisted healthcare tools that had become an indispensable part of her daily routine. Her heart had not just healed. It had found a new rhythm. But more importantly, Grace had found a new perspective. Every day, as she followed her health plan and saw her numbers improve, she began to share her story. It started with her neighbors. At first, she just mentioned the health tech in passing, explaining how the system had helped catch her heart condition before it spiraled out of control. But soon, she was leading informal meetings at the local community center, talking about how technology and healthcare could work together to help older adults, just like her, live fuller, healthier lives. "I was afraid," Grace would tell her listeners, "afraid of the future, afraid of what I didn't understand." But it turns out it's not about fearing technology. It's about using it as a tool to empower ourselves. Her story spread, and the response was overwhelming. People were intrigued by the idea of using AI to manage their health, but they were also nervous. They worried about privacy, about becoming too reliant on technology, or simply about the unknowns that came with something so new. Yet, through her workshops and personal conversations, Grace helped her neighbors see that the future of healthcare didn't have to be intimidating. It was about balance, trusting the technology, but also holding on to the human connection with doctors, loved ones, and caregivers. One of her neighbors, Marjorie, had been especially resistant to the idea. An elderly woman in her late 70s, Marjorie had always relied on traditional medicine and the face-to-face interaction she'd grown up with. When Grace first told her about her AI system, Marjorie had scowled. "I don't trust those machines, Grace," she'd said bluntly. "They can't replace real people." But after several months of watching Grace's improvements and listening to her experiences, Marjorie had finally come around. At first, she agreed to use the AI to monitor her blood pressure, just as a trial. Now, every time Grace saw her, Marjorie would smile and proudly show her the health data, excited to track her progress with a level of precision she never imagined possible. The community's response began to shift. More and more seniors were curious about how AI could help with their chronic conditions, especially heart disease, diabetes, and arthritis, ailments that had long plagued older generations. Grace had, unknowingly, sparked a movement in her small town. People began adopting the AI systems, feeling reassured by the knowledge that they could catch potential health issues early, avoid unnecessary hospital visits, and take control of their health in a way they hadn't been able to before. Meanwhile, at the heart of the technological revolution, Elon Musk's company was continuing its work on healthcare innovations. The AI system Grace had relied on was only the tip of the iceberg. As the technology progressed, new advancements began to emerge. Robots that could assist in home care for seniors, AI systems that offered personalized mental health support, and predictive algorithms that could identify health risks before they even appeared. These tools were gradually transforming the landscape of healthcare, particularly for seniors who had long been left behind by traditional medicine. Thanks to these technologies, people like Grace were not only living longer lives but healthier ones. Dr. Andrews, too, had noticed the profound impact of these technologies on his patients. He often found himself using the AI system in tandem with his medical expertise, diagnosing and treating conditions more efficiently than ever before. But what had surprised him most was how the older generation had embraced these tools, despite their initial resistance. He had expected more pushback, but instead, people were learning to trust the technology because they had seen its results firsthand. One afternoon, as Grace stood in front of a crowd at the local community center, sharing her story once again, a thought crossed her mind. She had gone from being a skeptic to being a champion for AI in healthcare. And as she spoke about her personal transformation, she realized that her journey was about more than just her health. It was about helping others embrace change, too. "I'm not here to tell you that AI will fix everything," she said, addressing the packed room of eager listeners. "But I can tell you this. It gives us a chance to take control when we feel like we've lost it. It lets us understand our bodies better than ever before, and it can be a lifeline when we need it most." As Grace looked around the room, seeing the faces of people who were once frightened of this technology, she felt a deep sense of pride. She had not just survived her health crisis. She had used it as a catalyst to create something meaningful. By embracing AI, She had opened doors for others, helping them step into the future of healthcare with confidence. And in doing so, she had changed not just her own life, but the lives of everyone around her. The world was different now, and so was Grace. She had learned to accept that change, especially in healthcare, was inevitable. The future was uncertain, but with the right tools, support, and mindset, it could be brighter, healthier, and more empowering than anyone could have imagined. As she looked at the sea of faces in the audience, some of whom were now holding their own health monitoring devices, she realized the truth. We're all in this together, and together, we can build a healthier future. And as for Grace, she knew that her journey was just beginning. The AI, the technology, the doctors, they were part of a much larger story, one that was unfolding every day for millions of people across the world. And for the first time in a long while, she felt truly hopeful about the future. Grace stood before a group of eager seniors at the local community center, her heart racing with excitement. Over the past few months, she had become the face of AI-assisted healthcare in her small town. She wasn't just a survivor of heart failure. She was an evangelist, a teacher, someone who had embraced change and was now helping others do the same. "Good morning, everyone," Grace called out, a welcoming smile spreading across her face. "Thank you for coming today. I know many of you are here because you've heard about the new health tech I've been using. Some of you are curious, others are skeptical, and some are probably wondering if this is just another fad. Well, let me tell you, it's not." She paused and looked around the room. Familiar faces, people she had grown up with, people who had seen her at her lowest, were now looking at her with interest. Some still clung to the old ways of thinking, trusting doctors, medications, and treatments that had been around for decades. But there was a glimmer of curiosity in their eyes. They were ready to listen. "I won't pretend to have all the answers," she continued, "but I can tell you this. I've seen firsthand how this technology has changed my life. The AI system that tracks my health didn't just catch my heart failure, it helped me take control of it. It's given me more peace of mind than I've had in years. And today, I want to show you how it can do the same for you." Grace introduced the demonstration. She explained how the AI system could monitor a variety of health metrics, blood pressure, glucose levels, sleep patterns, and adjust recommendations based on real-time data. For seniors, this was revolutionary. It wasn't just about tracking numbers. It was about personalized care that took the burden off of them and gave them back their independence. A murmur of surprise ran through the room. Can it really do all that? Marjorie, the neighbor who had once been so resistant to technology, asked, her voice filled with wonder. "Absolutely," Grace replied, smiling warmly. "It's like having a personal healthcare assistant that's with you 24/7, giving you feedback and guidance. It doesn't replace your doctor, but it works alongside them, helping you stay on top of your health in a way we've never been able to before." Marjorie hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "What about privacy? Is it safe?" Grace nodded, acknowledging the concern that many had. "That's a good question. All the data is encrypted and secure. You own your health data. The system doesn't sell it to anyone. The point is to give you control over your own health, not take it away." The crowd seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. Grace continued the session by showing everyone how to use the system, step by step, and how to input their own health data. By the end of the session, most of the attendees were eager to try it for themselves. As the weeks went on, Grace's workshops grew in size. Word had spread about her success story, and the seniors in town were increasingly interested in how AI could help them live longer, healthier lives. Some of them were hesitant, but they had seen the impact it had on Grace, and that was enough to get them to try it. Emily, Grace's daughter, had been watching from the sidelines, proud but also amazed at how her mother had transformed. Grace had gone from being a patient, someone who was afraid of the future, to a leader, a teacher, a role model. Emily never would have predicted this in 1,000 years. "I can't believe how many people are coming to your workshops, Mom," Emily said one afternoon as she visited Grace. Grace smiled, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "It's incredible, isn't it? At first, I was scared to trust the system, but now, I can see how much it's helping people, and I'm just getting started." Grace's role as a community advocate didn't stop there. She soon partnered with local healthcare providers, organizing community outreach programs that brought awareness to the benefits of AI in healthcare. The clinic started offering free consultations to seniors about how to integrate the AI system into their routine, and they began seeing better outcomes, with patients reporting higher satisfaction and fewer emergency room visits. Grace was no longer just living with her heart condition. She was empowering others to take control of their own health. The ripple effect of her decision to embrace technology had reached far beyond her own life, impacting an entire generation of seniors in her town. As she stood before another group of seniors, ready to teach them how to use their own health monitoring systems, Grace felt a sense of fulfillment she had never imagined. She had found her purpose, her passion, and a new way to help others. And in doing so, she had built a future not just for herself, but for her entire community. As Grace's workshops grew in popularity, her confidence and sense of purpose flourished. What had started as a small group of curious neighbors in her town had now evolved into a movement. The workshops, once limited to her community center, had expanded to virtual sessions, reaching thousands of seniors across the country. They were eager to hear her story and learn how AI had not only saved her life but had given her a second chance at living it fully. Her outreach efforts didn't stop there. Grace had begun to partner with national health organizations and tech companies to create accessible educational materials about how AI could be used to monitor and improve health. Thanks to the increasing interest in healthcare innovation, she had been invited to speak at conferences and seminars, advocating for seniors' access to AI-powered solutions. Technology can often feel intimidating, especially when you're older, Grace told a packed auditorium during her most recent speaking engagement. But it doesn't have to be that way. The future of healthcare is about inclusion, empowerment, and accessibility. It's about helping people like us take control of our own health. In the audience, several doctors, technologists, and healthcare leaders nodded in agreement. They had heard of Grace's success story, and now they were hearing her voice advocating for the very people they served. Grace's growing influence was catching the attention of organizations both big and small. One such company, Meditech, had been developing a cutting-edge AI platform specifically designed to assist older adults with chronic conditions. Grace had already been using their system for several months, and she had provided feedback that was now being implemented in the latest version of the product. "Grace, you're more than just a user of our technology," said Mara, a product manager at Meditech, during a meeting they had scheduled. "You're a catalyst for change. Your story is resonating with so many people. We'd love to bring you on as an official advisor. Your insights will help shape the future of senior healthcare, and we want to make sure we're addressing the real needs of your generation." Grace sat back in her chair, the weight of the offer settling in. To think that just a year ago, she was struggling to survive heart failure, and now she was being asked to help design the future of healthcare for seniors. It was almost overwhelming. "I'm honored, Mara," Grace replied thoughtfully, "but I have to admit, I'm still learning myself. It's not just the technology, it's about building trust. Many people like me feel disconnected from this kind of change." "That's exactly why we need you," Mara said, leaning forward. "You've already shown people how to embrace it. You're one of the few who truly understands both the power and the fear that comes with such radical shifts. We need someone who can bridge that gap, someone who can advocate for a world where healthcare isn't about systems controlling us, but about empowering us." Grace paused for a moment, feeling the magnitude of what was being asked of her. She had always prided herself on being a hands-on person, someone who solved problems by diving in and making things happen. But this was something bigger than herself. It was about ensuring that AI-powered healthcare was accessible, ethical, and impactful for all seniors, regardless of their technological literacy or income. "I'm in," Grace said with resolve. "Let's make this work." The next few months were a whirlwind. Grace found herself traveling across the country, speaking at conventions, meeting with healthcare leaders, and collaborating with Meditech's engineers to ensure the AI systems they were developing met the real needs of seniors. But it wasn't just about creating a product that worked, it was about changing the mindset around the role of AI in healthcare. At one conference in New York, Grace met a group of healthcare professionals who had been resistant to the idea of AI-based healthcare, particularly for older patients. One doctor, Dr. Lorraine Hughes, expressed her concerns. "Grace, I admire what you've done, and I can see how this system helped you personally. But what about the risks? AI doesn't have the emotional intelligence that a human doctor has. Can we really trust a machine with life and death decisions? Grace had heard similar arguments before, but this time, she felt more prepared to respond. I understand your concerns, Dr. Hughes, Grace said calmly, her voice steady. But let's be honest, humans make mistakes too. What AI offers is not about replacing doctors, but about augmenting their ability to make accurate, data-driven decisions. The goal isn't to replace the human touch, it's to enhance it. Imagine if doctors had more time to focus on you, the patient, rather than on paperwork and administrative tasks. That's the future we're building. The room fell silent. For the first time, the idea that AI could actually complement human healthcare, not replace it, seemed to click. Dr. Hughes nodded slowly. I see your point. It's about balance and collaboration, not substitution. Grace smiled. Exactly. The future of healthcare is about partnership, human expertise, and AI intelligence working side by side. As Grace continued her work, she began to realize that the path forward wasn't just about improving technology or healthcare systems. It was about changing how people thought about healthcare itself. It was about making healthcare more accessible and inclusive for people of all ages, especially those who had been traditionally underserved by the system. In her talks, Grace started sharing stories of people who had transformed their lives with the help of AI, from seniors in rural communities who had never had access to cutting-edge healthcare, to those who had felt invisible in a system that seemed to ignore their needs. She spoke of empowerment, about how taking charge of your health could give you back control over your life. You're not just a patient. You're the most important part of your healthcare team, Grace would say, standing before the crowd. We can't rely on technology alone to make us better. It's about the human connection. It's about trust, collaboration, and ensuring that no one is left behind. Grace's work was only beginning. The AI systems that had helped save her life were now helping hundreds, then thousands of others. And with each success, she saw the potential to create a new future for senior healthcare. A future where technology was a tool, not a threat, and where aging with dignity was no longer something to fear. As Grace sat back one evening, reflecting on how far she had come, she realized that the true measure of success was not in the technology itself, but in the human lives it touched. She had been given a second chance at life. Now, she was giving others the chance to live theirs to the fullest. The road ahead would be long, but the journey was worth it. The future of healthcare was bright, and Grace knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. The months after Grace became an official advisor for Meditech were a blur of travel, speaking engagements, and endless meetings with tech developers, doctors, and healthcare administrators. It seemed like everywhere she went, there was someone who needed convincing, someone who had doubts about the future of AI in healthcare. Despite the widespread enthusiasm for the possibilities of the technology, there were still roadblocks. Grace had never imagined how much resistance she would encounter, even from people she admired. At a conference in Washington, D.C., Grace found herself sitting at a round table with some of the country's leading healthcare professionals. It was a prestigious event, and Grace had been invited as a key speaker to discuss how AI was reshaping the landscape of senior care. She was excited, but also apprehensive. Her experience with the technology had been overwhelmingly positive, but she knew the room would be full of people who still questioned the role of AI in making life and death decisions. The panel began with an open discussion, and Grace took her turn to speak. As you all know, AI has already made a significant impact on the healthcare industry. My personal story is proof of how these tools can help us monitor our health and stay ahead of conditions that might otherwise go undiagnosed. But the key here is integration, not replacement. AI can work alongside doctors to improve outcomes, reduce unnecessary hospital visits, and give us a more comprehensive view of our health. As she spoke, Grace noticed Dr. Roberts, a prominent cardiologist, looking skeptical. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't hold back. Grace, I appreciate your story, I really do. But I've been practicing medicine for over 30 years, and I can't help but wonder where we draw the line, he said, adjusting his glasses. I understand the technology behind AI, but there's something irreplaceable about human intuition. Machines may be able to track data, but can they truly understand the complexities of human emotion, the nuances of individual patient care? His words hung in the air, and the room grew silent. Grace felt a tightness in her chest. She understood where Dr. Roberts was coming from. After all, she'd felt that way herself before embracing the technology. But now, with her own experience and the success of the AI in her life, she had a different perspective. "I don't think anyone here is saying we should abandon human intuition," Grace replied, choosing her words carefully. "But let me ask you, Dr. Roberts, how many times has the sheer volume of data caused doctors to miss something critical? How many heart attacks could have been avoided if the right tests had been run at the right time?" I'm not advocating for AI to replace doctors. I'm advocating for AI to assist them, to make sure they don't miss anything. There was a long pause before Dr. Roberts spoke again, softer this time. "I see your point. I just worry that we might be rushing too fast into something that's not fully understood. We have to consider the long-term implications for patient privacy and data security." Grace nodded, acknowledging his concern. "You're right. That's a major issue, and it's one we all need to address. We have to make sure that the data is secure and that patients have control over their own information. But the idea that we should hold back from technological advancements because we're afraid of the unknown, that's not the answer either. If we don't move forward, we risk leaving behind millions of people who could benefit from this technology." The conversation left Grace thinking deeply. While there were so many who saw the promise of AI, there were also legitimate fears that couldn't be dismissed. The ethical dilemmas surrounding data security, privacy, and the human element in healthcare couldn't simply be brushed aside. On her flight back home, Grace received a call from Mara at Meditech. "Grace, I know the conference didn't go exactly as we'd hoped," Mara said, her voice sounding strained. "We're hearing a lot of pushback from doctors, patients, and even lawmakers. There's a growing fear about the reliance on AI in decision-making, especially when it comes to sensitive health issues. We need to rethink how we're presenting these systems." Grace sighed, rubbing her temples. She had expected this, but hearing Mara's frustration made the challenges seem even more daunting. "What are we going to do? We can't ignore these concerns, but we can't let fear stop progress either." "I'm not saying we ignore it," Mara replied. "I'm saying we need to find a way to show people the human side of the technology. We need to build trust, not just through the technology itself, but by making sure that people feel heard and that their concerns are taken seriously. It's about the experience, not just the results." Grace sat quietly, reflecting on what Mara had said. Trust. That was the key. It wasn't enough to just roll out a system and expect people to adopt it. She had learned that firsthand in her own journey. She hadn't just embraced the technology because of the numbers. It was because she had seen real people in her community using it, helping each other, and making positive changes in their lives. Back in her town, Grace decided to take a different approach. She wasn't just going to speak at conferences and push for technological adoption. She needed to start at the ground level in her own community. After all, her story had started here. If she could gain their trust, it might serve as a model for other places around the country. She organized a series of town hall meetings, inviting residents to come and talk openly about their concerns regarding AI in healthcare. Grace wasn't just there to speak. She was there to listen. "I know many of you are still skeptical," Grace said at the first meeting. "And that's okay. I was skeptical too. But let's talk about it. What are your concerns? What's stopping you from embracing this technology?" One by one, the community members voiced their concerns. Some worried about their health data being hacked, others about the impersonal nature of using technology to monitor their health, and still others about the cost. "Will it be affordable for everyone?" one woman asked, raising her hand. "What if I can't afford it? My insurance doesn't cover it." Grace acknowledged the concern. "That's a real issue, and we're working on making sure that the technology is accessible to people across all income levels. But it's not just about technology. It's about building a support system that helps you integrate it into your daily life. And yes, we're pushing for insurance companies to cover the costs, just like they do for other types of medical care." The more Grace listened, the more she realized how important it was to meet people where they were. People weren't just scared of the technology, they were scared of losing control over their own health care. What she needed to show them was that AI wasn't a replacement, it was an empowerment tool. The following month, Grace was invited to speak at a major healthcare conference in Los Angeles, one of the largest in the country. As she prepared for her presentation, She knew she had to address the fears and concerns she had encountered head-on. Instead of just showcasing the technology's success stories, Grace framed her presentation around human-centered design, how AI could work for people and not the other way around. She shared her personal story but also incorporated real-life testimonials from people in her town who had initially been skeptical but had come to embrace the system with overwhelming results. AI is only as good as the people it's designed for, Grace told the audience. If we build it with people in mind, if we listen to their concerns and adjust, it will work. But if we force it on them, without addressing their fears, we'll never gain their trust. By the end of her presentation, Grace could see the shift in the room. There were still questions, still hesitations, but the conversation had begun to move in a more positive direction. People were starting to see the potential, not just the pitfalls. Back in her town, Grace's message continued to spread. More people were adopting AI systems, and the community was beginning to see the benefits: reduced emergency room visits, earlier detection of chronic conditions, and better overall health outcomes. But Grace knew this was just the beginning. She had only scratched the surface. The world of healthcare was vast, and the challenges ahead were enormous. But for the first time, she felt hopeful. By combining technology with compassion, data with trust, and expertise with real human connection, she knew she could help shape the future of healthcare for generations to come. The road to acceptance would be long, but with each step, Grace was paving the way for a healthier, more empowered future for seniors everywhere. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? As Grace's influence grew, so did the number of people who wanted a piece of the change she was advocating for. From tech companies to lawmakers, everyone seemed to have an opinion about how AI should be implemented in the healthcare system. For the first time, Grace realized that the path forward wasn't just about convincing people in her community or at healthcare conferences. It was about engaging with policymakers and legislators to ensure the changes she was pushing for were supported by law. One crisp autumn morning, Grace received a phone call that would alter the trajectory of her campaign. The voice on the other end belonged to Senator Emily Carter, a powerful advocate for healthcare reform and a member of the Senate's Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. Grace, Senator Carter's voice was warm but firm. "We've been following your work, and we're impressed by what you've accomplished. We believe the integration of AI into healthcare could be a game changer, especially for seniors. But there's a lot of skepticism in Washington about moving too quickly on this. We need someone with a personal story, someone who's experienced the benefits of AI firsthand, to come to Capitol Hill and help us craft legislation that will ensure equitable access to this technology." Grace's heart raced. This was the moment she'd been waiting for, the chance to help shape national policy and bring AI healthcare access to millions of seniors. "I'd be honored to help in any way I can, Senator," Grace said, her voice filled with conviction. "But I'm not a politician. I'm just a regular person who wants to make sure my neighbors and friends have the same opportunities I've had." "That's exactly why we need you, Grace," Senator Carter replied. "It's time to bring the real-world voices to the table. We want to hear from people like you who are living the reality of what AI and healthcare can do." A few weeks later, Grace found herself stepping into a sleek, glass-walled conference room in Washington, D.C. The room was filled with powerful legislators, healthcare policy experts, and lobbyists from major tech companies. Grace had never been in a space like this before, and the tension in the air was palpable. These were the people who controlled the future of healthcare policy. Senator Carter introduced her to the group. "Everyone, this is Grace Adams. She's the one who's been leading the charge and showing how AI can improve the lives of seniors. Grace, I want you to tell these fine people what it's been like for you." Grace felt her palms sweating as she took the floor, but as she looked around at the faces in the room, she steadied herself. These weren't just policymakers. They were people who could help turn her vision into reality. "My story's simple," Grace began. "I'm just a woman who was lucky enough to get a second chance at life because of AI. A year ago, I was on the brink of death, facing heart failure. But with the help of AI-powered health monitoring tools, I was able to catch complications early and get the care I needed. But this isn't just about me. It's about making sure that technology like this is available to everyone, especially older adults who are often overlooked in traditional healthcare models. My question is, why shouldn't everyone have access to life-saving technology? A silence fell over the room. Grace had made her point, and she could see the members of the committee exchanging glances. But not everyone in the room shared her enthusiasm. After Grace's heartfelt testimony, the conversation shifted to more technical issues. Several lobbyists from large healthcare organizations raised concerns about the costs and logistics of integrating AI systems into existing healthcare infrastructure. AI is not a one-size-fits-all solution, said Tom Davidson, a lobbyist for one of the nation's largest healthcare insurance companies. We're talking about large-scale data integration, privacy concerns, and the cost of implementing AI tools across healthcare networks. For many seniors, this technology will be out of reach. What are we doing to ensure that the AI systems won't end up further dividing the rich and the poor, or the urban and the rural? Grace was prepared for this kind of pushback, but hearing it in person made her realize just how deep the challenges were. It wasn't just about building trust with individuals. It was about tackling systemic barriers that made technological adoption harder for certain populations. Tom, I understand your concerns, Grace replied. But the question is, how do we ensure that everyone has access to this technology? If we don't tackle the systemic inequalities now, we're just perpetuating the status quo. Seniors living in rural areas shouldn't have to worry about being left behind. The healthcare system has a long history of neglecting people based on geography, income, and race. This is an opportunity to change that. There were murmurs around the room, and Grace could feel the tension mounting. She had to thread the needle carefully. While she was fighting for fairness, she didn't want to alienate the very people who could make her vision a reality. I agree, said Dr. Michael Thompson, a physician and healthcare policy expert at the table. But there needs to be a regulatory framework to ensure that these AI tools are being used responsibly. We don't want people thinking AI can replace doctors. We have to ensure there's a balance between technology and human oversight. Grace nodded. This was a point she had been emphasizing in her work for months. AI should complement doctors, not replace them. But navigating the regulatory waters was a new challenge for her. I'm not asking for a free-for-all, Grace said. I'm asking for a framework that empowers healthcare providers to integrate AI while ensuring privacy, security, and accessibility. If we can find a way to make these tools more affordable, we can change the healthcare landscape. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. Over the following weeks, Grace met with more lawmakers and regulators, presenting her case for AI in healthcare. The conversations were exhausting, often dragging on for hours, but Grace was resolute. The technical discussions about data security, patient privacy, and the ethics of AI usage were challenging, but she remained focused on one simple goal: ensuring that seniors, especially those in underserved communities, had access to the same healthcare opportunities as anyone else. During one particularly tense meeting, a House representative, Jack Peterson, raised a question that had been gnawing at Grace for some time. Grace, you talk about the importance of affordability, but how do you reconcile that with the high costs of cutting-edge technology? If we open the floodgates, how do we make sure this doesn't turn into a profit-driven scheme where only the wealthy have access to these technologies? Grace thought for a moment before responding. That's a real concern, Representative Peterson, and I agree we need safeguards in place. But let's think about the long-term costs of not implementing these technologies. How many seniors are going undiagnosed because of gaps in healthcare access? How many people are ending up in emergency rooms with preventable conditions? AI could reduce hospital admissions, cut costs for insurance companies, and help seniors stay healthier longer. But we have to make sure it's done in a way that puts people before profits. That's why we need a balanced approach. Representative Peterson nodded, his expression thoughtful. You make a strong case. We'll need to dig deeper into the financial model, but I'm willing to listen. Despite the political struggles, Grace began to feel that the momentum was shifting. She wasn't just a voice in a crowd anymore. She was a part of the conversation at the highest levels of government. AI in healthcare for seniors was no longer a niche issue. It was a central topic in national discussions about healthcare reform. As the months passed, the bill that Senator Carter had proposed began to take shape. It would provide funding for pilot programs to test AI in senior healthcare, create safeguards around patient data, and ensure the technology was accessible to all seniors, regardless of income or geography. Grace's role had changed from an advocate to an active participant in the legislative process. She was no longer just telling her story. She was shaping the story of healthcare for the next generation of seniors. The road to reform wasn't easy, but Grace was no longer the woman she had been when she started this journey. She had learned how to fight for what she believed in, how to navigate complex systems, and how to turn personal pain into systemic change. And while the battles in Washington, D.C. were far from over, Grace knew one thing for certain: this was just the beginning. As Grace continued her work in Washington, D.C., pushing for policies that would allow AI to improve healthcare access for seniors, she found herself torn between her personal life and her growing role in shaping the future of medicine. While she was incredibly proud of the progress they had made, she couldn't shake the feeling that her personal life was slipping through her fingers like sand in an hourglass. Her relationship with her daughter, Sophia, had been strained lately. Sophia, now in her late 20s, had always been close to Grace, but the demands of Grace's advocacy had started to take a toll. Grace knew her daughter understood the importance of her work, but she couldn't help but feel guilty for all the moments they had missed together. One late afternoon, after another round of calls with healthcare lobbyists and policymakers, Grace returned home to find Sophia sitting on the couch, her face serious. "Mom, we need to talk," Sophia said. Looking up from her phone, Grace sat down beside her, setting aside her laptop. "What's going on? Everything okay?" Sophia hesitated before speaking. I don't want you to forget about us, about me. I know what you're doing is important, but it feels like you're always somewhere else, fighting for something, and I feel like you're not really here anymore. I miss you." Grace felt a pang in her chest. She had been so wrapped up in the whirlwind of meetings, speeches, and legislation that she hadn't fully realized how much it was affecting her family. She reached out and placed a hand on Sophia's shoulder. "I know I've been busy, and I'm sorry. You mean the world to me. But you also know how much this means to me. The work we're doing could change so many lives, especially for people like Nana." Sophia's face softened, but the concern in her eyes remained. "I get that, Mom. I really do. But I also know that Nana's not the only one who needs you. We all do. Just don't forget that." Grace nodded, feeling a wave of guilt wash over her. She had been so caught up in changing the world for others that she hadn't been there for the people who mattered most. It was a harsh reminder that, no matter how noble the cause, the people closest to you should never be left behind. In the days that followed, Grace made a conscious decision to step back and focus on her personal life. She scheduled a weekend getaway with Sophia, something they hadn't done in ages. They spent the weekend hiking in the mountains, catching up, and sharing stories. It was a reminder of how vital those personal connections were, and how easily they could be overlooked when chasing after larger goals. But Grace couldn't stay away from her work for long. A week later, a call from Mara, her contact at Meditech, pulled her back into the world of policy and innovation. "Grace, I know you've been trying to take some time off, but we need you. The bill for expanding AI in healthcare is about to go to committee, and we're facing opposition from some major players in the industry. They're lobbying to scale back funding for the AI tools that we need to reach seniors in rural areas," Mara said urgently. "I knew this was coming," Grace replied, running her fingers through her hair. "I'll be there. Just give me a day to get back into the swing of things." As much as Grace wanted to continue her break and spend time with Sophia, the call to action was too strong. She knew the bill was too important to let slide. So, once again, Grace found herself in the thick of things. Only this time, her approach was different. She began to focus on localizing the problem. While speaking to groups of healthcare professionals, tech developers, and community leaders, she emphasized the importance of making AI accessible at the community level, starting in small towns and rural areas where the need was often most dire. During a town hall meeting in Boise, Idaho, she was introduced to a local nurse named Jessica, who worked with seniors in a rural clinic. Jessica had seen firsthand the challenges of providing healthcare in an area with limited access to specialists, equipment, and even basic healthcare services. "Grace, I've been listening to your talks about AI, and I think it could really help us here," Jessica said. "But the problem is, we just don't have the infrastructure for it. Our clinic doesn't have the budget, and a lot of our seniors don't have the technology at home to even use something like this. Grace nodded, her mind racing. I understand. That's why it's so important that we make these tools affordable and ensure they can be used in rural communities. We need to make sure that the infrastructure is there, not just for the wealthy or for big cities, but for people like you and your patients. Jessica's face lit up. You're the first person who's actually listened to our concerns. Everyone else just assumes that if we build it, they will come. But we need something more than just access to technology. We need support, training, and resources to make sure the community can use it effectively. Grace smiled. Exactly. That's the kind of thing we need to be talking about in Washington. I'll make sure your voice is heard. Grace's work was beginning to evolve. While the policy debates in Washington, D.C. were important, she was realizing that true change would come when technology and innovation could meet people where they were, when it could be used not just by the wealthy, but by everyone, regardless of income, location, or background. In the following months, Grace shifted her focus. She began working with local healthcare providers, community organizers, and tech companies to pilot AI tools in rural areas. She collaborated with Meditech to create a model where seniors could receive basic training on how to use health monitoring devices, and clinics could get the resources they needed to implement these systems. One of the first successful pilots took place in rural Nevada, where a small town with a population of under 5,000 became the test case for her vision. The program was designed to bring AI-powered health monitoring to seniors who lived too far from the nearest hospital. The results were striking. Within the first 3 months, the town's emergency room visits dropped by nearly 20%. The local clinic was able to catch multiple early-stage health issues that would have otherwise gone unnoticed. But more importantly, the community felt more empowered. Seniors were able to take charge of their health in a way they hadn't been able to before. While Grace celebrated the successes of her local programs, she couldn't ignore the unintended consequences of her advocacy. The more AI was integrated into healthcare, the more questions arose about privacy, data ownership, and surveillance. As more people used AI tools to monitor their health, more data was being collected, data that could be hacked, misused, or sold to the highest bidder. At a meeting with privacy advocates, Grace found herself facing tough questions. Grace, you're doing great work, but at what cost? Asked David, a privacy lawyer. With all this health data being collected, who owns it? Who controls it? What happens when that data falls into the wrong hands? Grace had no easy answers. She had always advocated for better access and equity in healthcare, but now, she was beginning to realize the complex ethical challenges of balancing privacy with innovation. Her work, which had been focused on helping people, now had to include safeguards for those very people. I don't have all the answers, Grace said honestly, but we're committed to making sure that people have control over their data. The idea is not to surveil anyone. It's to empower them to take control of their health. As the months passed, Grace's work continued to evolve. She had learned that integrating AI into healthcare was not just about pushing a technological solution. It was about creating a human-centered framework where technology could be an ally, not a replacement, for the deep, human connection that healthcare had always relied upon. She had also learned that change wasn't just about the technology. It was about the people who would use it and the systems that had to support it. Grace's journey had been long and difficult, but as she looked out at the landscape of healthcare reform, she knew one thing. She had only just begun. The future of healthcare wasn't about making the system perfect. It was about making it work for everyone. Grace had made incredible strides over the past year. Her work had brought AI-powered healthcare tools to rural communities, driven policy changes in Washington, and sparked a nationwide conversation about the role of technology in improving healthcare for seniors. But with progress came an increasing sense of responsibility and pressure. As the AI healthcare movement gained momentum, more questions arose, especially surrounding privacy, data security, and the potential for misuse of personal health information. Grace had always been passionate about making healthcare more accessible, but now she was faced with the difficult task of ensuring that this new wave of technology didn't violate the trust of the very people it was meant to help. It was a chilly morning when Grace stepped into the conference room at Meditech's headquarters. She had been working closely with the company for months, but today was different. There was an air of urgency in the room, and the CEO, David Wu, was already at the head of the table, waiting for her. Grace, I'm glad you could join us, David said with a tight smile. We've been following the success of the rural pilot programs, and we're thrilled to be expanding our AI tools to even more communities. But there's been an issue. A serious one. Grace furrowed her brow. What kind of issue? David motioned to a large screen at the front of the room. A news article flashed up with the headline, AI Healthcare Tool Data Breach Exposes Thousands of Patients' Personal Health Records. Grace's heart sank. She knew this kind of breach was inevitable, but seeing it happen in real time, with data linked to sensitive healthcare information, made it hit harder than she had imagined. We've got a security breach on our hands, David continued, his voice grim. This data leak could put everything we've worked for in jeopardy. Not only could it hurt patients, but it could spark a backlash that might set back the entire industry. Over the next few days, the media frenzy surrounding the breach escalated. Headlines screamed about the vulnerability of AI-powered healthcare tools, and lawmakers began demanding accountability. Grace's phone rang incessantly, and her inbox was flooded with messages from concerned stakeholders, privacy advocates, senior healthcare organizations, regulators, and investors. Everyone wanted answers. How could this happen? One email read. What are you doing to protect patient privacy? The whole point of AI in healthcare was to make things better, but this breach is a disaster waiting to happen. Grace understood the gravity of the situation. The trust of the public was fragile. One misstep, one breach of privacy, and all the progress they had made could crumble. She knew she had to take swift action, but there were no easy solutions. She called an emergency meeting with Meditech's security team, legal advisors, and policy consultants to get to the bottom of the breach. It turned out that the incident was a cyber attack targeting the company's servers, exploiting a vulnerability in the cloud storage system that housed sensitive patient data. The breach had compromised the personal health records of thousands of individuals, including seniors in the rural pilot programs. We've already begun implementing stronger encryption protocols and tightening access controls, said Alexandra, the Chief Information Security Officer at Meditech. But this will take time, and it's going to require a complete overhaul of our security infrastructure. Grace rubbed her temples, overwhelmed by the situation. What about the patients? How do we protect their data moving forward? This breach could undermine everything we've done for these seniors. They trust us. We'll need to notify all affected patients immediately, Alexandra replied. We'll offer credit monitoring and identity theft protection as a precaution. And we'll be transparent about what happened. The key is to act fast and make sure this doesn't happen again. Within hours of the news breaking, the public outcry was deafening. Privacy advocates, especially those in the senior community, expressed outrage at the breach. Many feared that AI-driven healthcare tools were too risky, that their sensitive data was vulnerable, and that companies like Meditech were prioritizing profits over privacy. The AARP and other senior advocacy groups issued statements condemning the breach, and lawmakers from both sides of the aisle demanded that stronger protections be put in place before AI could be further rolled out in healthcare. I'm not sure how we can move forward with AI healthcare tools if we can't guarantee the security of the most vulnerable populations, said Senator Rebecca Clark, a key supporter of Grace's bill in the Senate. We need to ensure that privacy protections are built into the infrastructure, not an afterthought. Grace found herself on the defensive, but she knew that she couldn't back down. She had worked too hard to let this scandal derail everything. In fact, it was a wake-up call, a reminder that innovation couldn't happen at the expense of patient trust. Determined to regain the public's trust, Grace took to social media and appeared on several high-profile news programs to address the breach. She spoke about the importance of patient privacy, how AI could be a tool for good, but only if it was handled responsibly. Let me be clear, she said during a televised interview. This breach is unacceptable. We cannot, will not, allow this to happen again. Our mission has always been to bring cutting-edge technology to the people who need it most, but we can only do that if we uphold the highest standards of privacy and security. We will work relentlessly to fix this, and we will ensure that no senior is ever put at risk again. Her words were met with mixed reactions. Some praised her for taking accountability, while others remained skeptical. But one thing was clear. Grace was not about to let this crisis define her movement. Over the next few weeks, Grace worked tirelessly with Meditech, government agencies, and privacy advocates to overhaul the security protocols surrounding AI-powered healthcare tools. They implemented stronger encryption, multi-factor authentication, and strict access controls for anyone who interacted with patient data. New privacy standards were set, and a new patient data transparency policy was introduced, allowing individuals to have full control over their personal health information. In addition to the technical fixes, Grace spearheaded a national public education campaign aimed at reassuring seniors about the safety of AI-powered healthcare. This campaign emphasized the importance of data protection, clear informed consent, and the right to opt out of any AI monitoring systems. Slowly, but surely, the tide began to turn. Public opinion started to shift back in favor of AI in healthcare, as people saw that Grace and her team were taking their concerns seriously. But Grace knew that rebuilding trust would be a long journey. The incident had shown her how fragile the system was, how quickly things could go wrong, and how much more work was needed to create a healthcare system that truly prioritized the well-being of its patients. Despite the progress she had made, Grace found herself facing an ethical crossroads. She was passionate about making AI technology available to those who needed it most, but she was increasingly concerned about the implications of widespread data collection. The more she learned about the potential for data misuse, the more she questioned whether all technologies were ready for the kind of rapid implementation she had envisioned. Sitting in her office late one evening, Grace pondered the bigger questions. What did it mean to balance innovation with privacy? How could we protect individuals while still pushing for change? And was there a way to make the healthcare system more equitable without sacrificing people's rights? As the sun dipped below the horizon, Grace knew one thing for certain. The fight was far from over. There would be more obstacles, more questions, more crises to face. But as long as she kept her eye on the prize, ensuring that seniors were cared for and protected, she would continue to push forward. As the dust began to settle from the data breach and the subsequent fallout, Grace found herself caught in an emotional whirlwind. The battle to protect patient privacy was far from over, but she had learned a painful lesson. The cost of progress could sometimes be too high, and those who paid the price were often the most vulnerable. It had been 2 months since the breach, and although things were slowly returning to normal, Grace couldn't shake the weight of everything that had transpired. Her focus on the mission had nearly broken her personal relationships, especially with Sophia, her daughter. The time they had spent together during the rough weeks after the breach had been sparse, and Grace knew that something had to change. She couldn't continue to pour herself entirely into her work while neglecting the people who mattered most. One Friday afternoon, Grace stood in her office, reviewing a new draft of the Patient Data Transparency Bill. She had just finished a round of calls with senior advocacy groups and privacy consultants, and the weight of the work was beginning to wear on her. As much as she tried to focus on the bigger picture, she couldn't stop thinking about the small, personal moments she had missed. Moments with Sophia. She had promised Sophia that they would spend more time together, but the weight of the national conversation about AI in healthcare had only grown, and now, the federal hearings on the bill were looming. But as the evening sun cast long shadows through the windows of her office, she decided to take a break from the chaos. Picking up the phone, she dialed Sophia's number. "Hey, it's me," Grace said when Sophia picked up, trying to sound casual. "Mom." "Hi," Sophia answered. There was a slight pause before she added, "I haven't heard from you in a while. How's everything going?" Grace smiled, though it felt strained. "Busy. Same old, same old. But I wanted to check in. It's been a while since we had some time together. How about we do something tomorrow? Just the two of us?" Sophia's voice softened. "I'd really like that. I miss you." "I miss you too," Grace replied, her voice thick with emotion. It was hard to admit, but she knew it was true. The last few months had been a blur, and she had neglected the people she loved most. "How about we grab lunch and catch up? I could use some good food and a break from all this work." Sophia laughed, the tension in her voice finally fading. "That sounds perfect. I'll meet you at that little cafe we love. Cafe Rose?" "It's a date," Grace agreed, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. That evening, after a long day of policy reviews and meetings, Grace took a quiet walk along the riverbank near her apartment. The water was calm, reflecting the dimming sky, and for the first time in a long while, Grace allowed herself to simply breathe. Her mind, usually consumed by healthcare policies and the future of AI, wandered to her past. She thought about her own mother, who had been one of the first seniors to benefit from AI-powered healthcare tools during the pilot program. Her mother, Irene, had always been skeptical about technology, but after seeing how the AI tools helped her track her blood pressure and manage her medications, Irene had become one of Grace's strongest supporters. But as Grace stood by the water, she realized that while she had worked tirelessly to bring those tools to other seniors, she had neglected to ensure that the people in her own life felt as cared for as the thousands of patients she fought for daily. Sophia, who had always been her rock, deserved more than just a few hours squeezed in between meetings and speeches. She needed a mother, not just a policy advocate. Balance. It was something Grace had always struggled with, but it was becoming increasingly clear that without it, her mission could lose its soul. The next day, Grace met Sophia at Café Rose, a cozy little spot in the heart of the city. As they sat down with cups of steaming coffee, Grace could feel the weight lifting from her shoulders. The familiar hum of the cafe, the clink of silverware, and the laughter around them felt like a soft reminder of the simpler things in life. "So, what's been going on in your world?" Grace asked, genuinely interested, as she took a sip of her coffee. Sophia leaned back in her chair, her eyes sparkling as she began to recount the latest developments in her art career. She had recently launched an exhibition showcasing her photography work, and she was beginning to gain recognition. But as she spoke, Grace noticed a small frown tugging at her daughter's lips. "I've been thinking a lot, Mom," Sophia said, setting down her cup. "About us. About what's happening with your work. I get that you're changing the world, and I'm so proud of you. But, I don't know if you've noticed, but you've been kind of distant." Grace felt a lump form in her throat. She knew exactly what Sophia meant. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "I've been so wrapped up in everything, trying to fix problems on a national level, that I've forgotten what matters most, being present. With you. With us." Sophia smiled softly. "I get it, Mom. I really do. But you've got to find a way to make room for yourself, too. I don't want to be the person who only sees you when it's convenient, or when there's an emergency. I want to be a part of your life, not just the person you call when you need a break." Grace nodded, feeling the weight of Sophia's words. She had been so focused on making a difference for everyone else that she had almost forgotten to nurture her own relationships. She had always prided herself on being a strong woman, a force of nature, but in doing so, she had neglected the people who made her human. "I know, sophomore. I promise, I'll do better. I'm learning that all this work is important, but it's not everything. And I don't want to miss out on the moments that matter most." As Grace sat across from her daughter, the clarity she had been seeking came to her. She didn't have to choose between her mission and her family. The two were intertwined. She could still fight for seniors, for technology and healthcare, but she didn't have to sacrifice her emotional well-being or the relationships she cherished along the way. The next morning, Grace made an important decision. She would take a more balanced approach to her advocacy. Instead of rushing headlong into the fray of healthcare reform, she would make space for the people she loved, and for her own peace of mind. She would focus on working smarter, not harder, and be more intentional about how she spent her time. That meant saying no more often, making room for more weekends with Sophia, and being fully present when it mattered most. As Grace continued to work on the patient data transparency bill, she made a conscious decision to include more community feedback and personal stories in her speeches. She began highlighting the real, lived experiences of seniors who had benefited from AI-powered healthcare, people like her mother, Irene, and many others from the rural pilot programs. These were the stories that mattered, and they reminded her why she was fighting in the first place. But above all, she knew that it was time to focus on her legacy. Not just the policies she would leave behind, but the relationships that would shape her personal legacy. Grace's work was about more than AI or healthcare reform. It was about helping people, and that started with her own family. As she sat in her office, planning the next phase of her advocacy, Grace smiled. The balance she had been searching for wasn't something she could find. It was something she had to create. And in that moment, she realized that she was finally on the right path. The sounds of clattering keyboards and ringing phones filled the air at Grace's office. She had never been one to shy away from hard work, But as the debate over the patient data transparency bill grew more heated, the walls of her once quiet office seemed to close in. The stakes had never been higher. She had spent the last few months pushing through the political and corporate resistance, and now, the bill was about to face a critical vote in Congress. It wasn't just a matter of passing the legislation anymore. Now, it was about maintaining the integrity of the bill in the face of growing opposition from powerful forces. Big Tech, concerned about new restrictions on data collection, had begun lobbying fiercely against it. Meanwhile, some of her allies in Congress, who had initially supported the bill, were starting to waver, fearing a potential backlash from constituents who didn't fully understand the implications of AI in healthcare. Grace had expected the battle to be tough, but nothing had prepared her for the political machine she was now up against. Grace sat at a long table in a sleek conference room, across from Senator Charles Reed, a well-known opponent of her bill. Reed had once been a staunch supporter of AI-driven healthcare innovation, but recently, he had become a vocal critic, fearing the bill would hamper the growth of the technology sector. "So, Grace," Senator Reed began, leaning back in his chair and folding his arms, "I've read your bill. I've heard your arguments. But let's be real here. This isn't about protecting seniors' privacy. It's about stifling innovation." Grace clenched her jaw but kept her voice calm. "It's about ensuring that the technology doesn't harm the very people it's meant to help. Without robust protections in place, seniors will continue to be vulnerable to exploitation, and their data will be used without their knowledge or consent." "Exploitation?" Reed chuckled. "This bill goes too far, Grace. You're trying to regulate a rapidly evolving industry with policies that haven't been fully thought through. You're tying the hands of companies that are bringing life-saving technology to people. And what happens when that technology is abused?" Grace shot back. "What happens when it's used to sell seniors' health data to the highest bidder? What happens when the privacy violations are swept under the rug because profits are more important?" Reed's face hardened. "You're not just talking about privacy. You're talking about putting so many restrictions on this technology that it will take years for it to be adopted. And by then, we'll be left behind. China and other countries will race ahead, leaving us in the dust." Grace exhaled sharply, trying to control her emotions. Senator Reed was not only a powerful ally turned foe, he was also someone she had once admired. His arguments were strong. Many of them played on the fear of being left behind in the global race for technological dominance. But Grace knew she couldn't let that kind of rhetoric deter her. As the debate in Washington heated up, Grace found herself in another room. This one filled with the corporate executives of some of the largest tech companies in the healthcare space. The room was sleek, polished, and meticulously organized, much like the companies they represented. The CEO of Meditech, David Wu, was there, as well as representatives from TechHealth, Neuromed, and other industry giants. They had all gathered to discuss the future of AI in healthcare, and more importantly, how to counteract the growing momentum behind Grace's bill. "Grace," David began, his tone more cautious than usual, "I know you're passionate about protecting seniors' privacy, but you've got to understand that the regulations you're pushing could cripple the industry." "I don't want to cripple the industry, David," Grace replied, her voice firm. "I want to ensure that it operates ethically and transparently. Right now, there's no accountability. You all know that as much as I do." "Accountability is a slippery word, Grace," said Elena Carter, the CEO of TechHealth, a company that had been investing heavily in AI-powered diagnostics. "We're talking about a huge leap forward in healthcare. Millions of lives will be saved if we can move forward without these regulatory roadblocks." Grace leaned forward. "And how many lives will be put at risk if personal health data is mishandled, sold, or exploited for profit? We need more than just promises. We need concrete action and real safeguards." There was an uncomfortable silence as the tech leaders exchanged glances. Grace could see that the pressure was building on them. They weren't used to being challenged like this, especially by someone with such direct ties to the senior community and a growing influence in Congress. "We're not against privacy protections, Grace," David finally said, "but we need more flexibility. The AI healthcare sector is evolving at a pace no one could have predicted. We need to be able to move quickly, to scale, without being bogged down by cumbersome regulations." "I'm not asking for a slowdown," Grace responded. "I'm asking for responsibility." You can move fast without leaving people behind. The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings, lobbying efforts, and backdoor negotiations. Every corner of Capitol Hill was buzzing with activity, and Grace found herself caught between her own beliefs and the heavy pressure from both big tech and political power players. Senator Reid had sent a letter to several key legislators, urging them to reject the bill outright. His arguments about technological progress and international competition were compelling, and some of her allies in Congress were beginning to waver. It became clear that this wasn't just a battle for privacy, it was also a battle for influence. Meanwhile, Grace's team was working tirelessly behind the scenes to gather support from grassroots organizations, privacy advocates, and even senior citizens who had benefited from the pilot programs. She needed to show the power of the people, the ones who were directly impacted by the technology. If she could rally public support, she might be able to counteract the corporate pressure and the political opposition. The night before the vote in Congress, Grace sat alone in her office, staring at the bill in front of her. She could feel the weight of everything: the years of work, the late nights, the people who were counting on her. She could hear the voices of the seniors she had met on her travels, the ones who had shared their stories with her, trusting her to make their voices heard. But then there was the reality of politics. The corporate interests that had billions at stake. The politicians who didn't want to be seen as anti-business or anti-progress. It was a tough pill to swallow. In the end, it wasn't just about winning or losing. It was about doing what was right, even when the world seemed stacked against you. Grace knew that change was slow, and sometimes it felt like progress was 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But she also knew that the fight for ethical AI and privacy protection was worth it. When she stood before the Senate committee the next morning, her speech was clear, concise, and unwavering. She didn't just advocate for the bill. She advocated for the seniors, the families, the people who deserved better. She made the case for a future where technology worked for the people, not the other way around. As the vote came in, it was closer than anyone had expected. But the bill passed, with a narrow margin. It wasn't a sweeping victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. Grace had made a stand, and although the battle was far from over, the win gave her something even more valuable: hope. Grace sat alone in her apartment late that evening, the faint glow of city lights streaming through the windows. The vote had been a success, just barely. The patient data transparency bill had passed, and she had delivered a speech that she hoped would be remembered as a turning point in the ongoing conversation about privacy and AI in healthcare. But for all the triumph of the moment, a familiar weight pressed down on her chest. The adrenaline of the vote had long faded, replaced by the exhaustion of the weeks and months of work that had led to this moment. The constant battles with tech giants, the endless meetings, the political maneuvering, everything had taken its toll on her emotionally. She had won the vote, yes, but at what cost? Grace stood up and moved to the window, gazing out at the skyline. It had always been a place of solace for her, a place to reflect on what truly mattered. As a child, she had dreamed of making a difference in the world, of changing things for the better. Her parents had instilled in her the values of hard work, of pushing boundaries, of making a mark on the world. But now, in the quiet of her apartment, those ideals felt like an insurmountable burden. She had spent so much time and energy fighting for seniors, for the protection of their data, and for the ethical implementation of AI in healthcare, that she had neglected the things that mattered most. Her relationship with Sophia was fractured. Despite the lunch they'd shared a few weeks ago, Grace still felt the distance between them, the quiet tension when they spoke. Her daughter had been patient, but Grace knew that patience had its limits. And then there was her own mother, Irene, who had been pushing her to slow down, to take a step back, to cherish the fleeting moments of life. But Grace had never been good at slowing down. She had always been a driven individual, and the competing demands of her personal life and her work had always seemed like a delicate balancing act. Every time she thought she had found equilibrium, something new came along to tilt the scales. As if on cue, her phone rang. It was her mother, Irene. "Mom," Grace answered with a sigh, her voice a mixture of relief and weariness. "Grace, I saw the news," Irene said, her tone warm yet knowing. "Congratulations on the vote. I'm proud of you. But I can tell you're tired." Grace smiled weakly. "I am, Mom. It's been a long road. You've done something important, but remember, this isn't the end of the road. You've already changed things, but there's more ahead. I know you're pushing yourself because you care, but please, don't forget about yourself in the process. Grace bit her lip, the weight of her mother's words sinking in. Irene had always been a calming presence in her life, a voice of reason when Grace needed it most. I know, Mom. I just feel like there's so much more to do. So many lives at stake, so much to fight for. Don't forget about the people who are right in front of you, Grace. Your daughter, your family, your own heart. You can't pour from an empty cup. Grace paused, feeling the truth of her mother's words. I'm trying, Mom. I really am. I just don't know how to stop, how to let go. Irene's voice softened. You don't have to let go, sweetie. But you need to remember that balance isn't about being perfect. It's about making space for the things that make you feel whole. You can change the world and still love the people around you. You don't have to sacrifice one for the other. Grace swallowed hard, her eyes welling up with unshed tears. It had been so long since she'd let herself feel vulnerable, so long since she'd allowed herself to acknowledge the emotional cost of her work. I'm so tired, Mom, she whispered. I know you are, Irene replied gently, but you don't have to carry it all by yourself. That night, after her conversation with her mother, Grace decided to take a step that she had been putting off for too long. She reached for her phone and sent a text to Sophia. Hey, I know I've been distant. I've been so focused on my work, and I've missed you. I love you. Can we talk tomorrow? Just the two of us? Almost immediately, her phone buzzed with a response. Of course, Mom. I miss you too. Let's meet for coffee tomorrow morning? Grace smiled through her tears. Maybe, just maybe, this was the first step toward healing. Not just for the bill or the mission, but for herself and her family. As she put her phone down and turned off the lights, Grace felt a deep sense of relief wash over her. She had been running on empty for so long, fueled by passion and determination, but now she understood the importance of taking a step back. Sometimes, the world could wait. The fight for AI transparency, for ethical healthcare practices, for privacy protections, it was all still worth it. But now, Grace knew that the work didn't have to come at the expense of everything else. The mission wasn't just about policy. It was about the people, the ones she fought for, the ones she loved. She had to make sure she wasn't losing sight of the things that truly mattered, even as she pushed forward in the public sphere. And so, as she lay in bed, Grace made a promise to herself. She would continue her work, but she would also take the time to nurture the relationships that had always been her anchor. The people who had supported her before the headlines and policy changes. Those were the people who would always matter most. The next morning, Grace met Sophia at the same cafe where they'd shared lunch weeks ago. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and for the first time in a long while, Grace felt the familiar comfort of being with her daughter. Sophia was already sitting at their usual table, her smile wide and bright as Grace walked in. "Mom!" she exclaimed, standing up to hug her. "It's been way too long." Grace hugged her back tightly, feeling the weight of everything. The exhaustion, the political battles, the internal conflicts, slowly melt away in her daughter's arms. "I'm sorry I've been distant, Soph," Grace said, her voice a little shaky. "I've been caught up in everything, and I've let it take over." Sophia nodded, her expression softening. "I get it, Mom. You've been doing important work. But we can't let the world take us away from each other, right?" Grace laughed, the sound full of emotion. "Right. I've learned that the hard way." As they sat down together, sipping their coffee and chatting about life, Grace felt a deep sense of peace. The fight for change would never be easy, but for the first time in a while, she felt like she could breathe again. She had made a difference in the world, and now it was time to make sure that the most important relationships in her life were never neglected again. Grace stood in front of the sleek glass doors, staring at the building in front of her. It was a tower of innovation, a symbol of everything she had been fighting against and everything she could now be working with. The logo on the building was unmistakable: Neuromed Technologies, one of the largest companies in AI-driven healthcare, a company she had spent years criticizing for its lack of transparency and privacy violations. But today, It wasn't the fight against Neuromed that had brought her here. It was the offer they had made. It had come in the form of a private meeting invitation from David Wu, the CEO of Neuromed. Grace had expected another round of negotiations, another attempt to get her to back down from her bill. But what David had offered in their first meeting had been nothing short of extraordinary. "Grace," he had said with a confident smile, "I know what you've been trying to accomplish with the patient data transparency bill, and I believe in your vision. But we also know that these kinds of changes take time. The technology moves faster than legislation, and we're ready to help make that change happen now." At first, Grace had been skeptical. She knew the stakes. She had seen how Neuromed and other tech companies had lobbied against bills like hers. But David wasn't offering a fight this time. He was offering a partnership. "We can help you get your bill passed faster than you ever thought possible," David had continued. "We can leverage our connections in Congress, bring in the data we've collected through our systems, and even provide the research that will show the world how AI can save lives. In return, we ask for some flexibility in how the bill regulates us." Grace had felt the weight of his words. Flexibility. That was the key. It wasn't just a partnership, it was a deal. In exchange for supporting her bill, Neuromed wanted less regulation on the use of patient data. They promised to be more transparent, more ethical. But Grace knew that their promises weren't always as clean as they appeared. She had spent years fighting against companies like Neuromed, who valued profit over people. She had spent sleepless nights pushing for more transparency, for the right of every senior citizen to know how their data was being used. And now, it felt as if that same company was offering her a shortcut to everything she wanted, with a price. Grace couldn't deny that the offer was tempting. If she accepted, the political power and resources that came with it could make her bill a reality in a fraction of the time. The backroom access, the lobbying efforts, the funding for further research, it could all be hers. And most importantly, it could fast-track real change in the healthcare industry. But at what cost? As she sat in the coffee shop, digesting the proposal, Grace couldn't help but feel a sense of betrayal. The very company that had lobbied against her for years was now offering to become an ally. It wasn't that she didn't believe in partnerships, but this one felt different. It felt like she was being bought. Was she really helping seniors if she accepted this deal? Could she trust Neuromed to act in good faith, to truly honor their promises of ethical data use? Was she willing to risk compromising her own moral integrity for the sake of efficiency? That afternoon, Grace sat down in her office, staring at the proposal in front of her. She had to make a decision. The vote for her bill was approaching, and the support from Neuromed could make or break it. But was the compromise worth it? She thought back to the times when she had met with seniors at community centers, hearing their stories of data exploitation and medical mistrust. She thought of Irene, her mother, who had always reminded her that real change came from integrity. Could she live with herself if she struck a deal with the very company she had spent years criticizing? The silence in the room felt deafening, and for a moment, Grace was overwhelmed by the pressure. The stakes were too high. Too many people were counting on her to make the right choice. Later that evening, Grace called Sophia. It had been a long day, filled with more difficult meetings and internal debates. She needed to talk to someone, to get another perspective, even if it meant facing the hard truth of her situation. "Mom, what's going on?" Sophia asked, her voice full of concern as she answered the phone. "You've been distant again." "I know, sweetie," Grace said, her voice heavy with emotion. "I've got something I need to decide, and it's tearing me apart." Sophia paused, waiting for her mother to continue. "I've been offered a deal, Sophia, from Neuromed. They want to help pass my bill, but they're asking for something in return. More control over the data. They promise to be ethical, but I don't know if I can trust them." Sophia was silent for a moment, letting the weight of Grace's words settle in. "What does your heart say, Mom?" Grace closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the question. "My heart says I want to do the right thing. I want to make sure everyone's data is protected, that the seniors we're fighting for don't get exploited. But my head is telling me that this deal could make everything happen faster, that it could get us where we need to go without all the roadblocks. Sometimes the easy way is tempting, but it doesn't always get you the right results," Sophia said softly. "I know it's hard, but don't lose yourself in the process. You fought too long for this to let anyone take that away. Grace felt a pang in her chest. Her daughter's words struck a chord. Sophia was right. It wasn't just about the bill or the speed of the progress. It was about staying true to her values. The next morning, Grace made the call. She dialed David Wu's number. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "David, I've thought long and hard about your offer," she said. "And after careful consideration, I've decided that I can't accept your terms." There was a brief silence on the other end. "Grace, you're making a mistake. We could make this work together. Think about what this could mean." "I have thought about it," Grace replied, her voice firm. "But my job is to protect the people, not to make deals that compromise their trust. I can't sacrifice what's right for what's easy." David's tone shifted. "I understand, but don't expect the support you want from us moving forward." "I'll take that chance," Grace said, before hanging up. In the days that followed, Grace felt a renewed sense of clarity. The fight for her bill was still ongoing, but it was no longer about who could help her the fastest or with the most resources. It was about what was right. The next few weeks were filled with more grassroots support, more connections with like-minded individuals who shared her vision. There would be more challenges ahead, more compromises to navigate, but Grace was ready. As she sat down at her desk, looking out over the city skyline, Grace smiled. The road ahead would be tough, but she had made the right choice. And no matter what happened, she knew that she could hold her head high. Integrity was worth more than any deal. Grace sat at her desk, staring at her inbox, the messages flooding in from every direction. Her decision to reject the Neuromed deal had reverberated throughout the political landscape, and now she was facing the consequences. The media had picked up the story, and it wasn't long before the backlash began to roll in. The first email that caught her attention was from Megan Doyle, a political strategist she had worked with in the past. The subject line read, "Urgent. Call me?" Grace hesitated for a moment before opening it. "Grace," Megan's email began, "I know you've made your decision, but I'm telling you right now, you've made a huge mistake. Neuromed was your ticket to getting this bill passed. You could have had the resources, the lobbying power, everything you need to get the legislation through. But now, you're going to face an uphill battle. This is political suicide." Grace felt a tightness in her chest. She had known rejecting the deal would have consequences, but hearing it from someone like Megan, who had been in the trenches of political battles for years, made it feel all the more real. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed with a message from Tom Hughes, a powerful lobbyist with ties to both political parties. "Grace, I've got to say, I don't agree with you rejecting Neuromed. I know you want to do the right thing, but sometimes the right thing isn't enough. The game is about who you know, not just what's right. If you want your bill to pass, you're going to have to play the game." The pressure was mounting. It seemed like everyone, from her strategic advisors to her allies in Congress, were telling her that rejecting the deal was a mistake. The stakes were high, time was running out for seniors, and the industry was shifting rapidly. The momentum was slipping away, and Grace could feel it. But through it all, a small voice inside her refused to give up. Integrity was the bedrock of her journey. Her values would guide her, not the promises of big corporations or the quick shortcuts that would ultimately undermine her mission. It was late afternoon when Grace sat down with Sarah Lee, a young activist from a coalition of digital rights groups that had been championing the cause of data privacy for years. Grace had met Sarah at a conference months ago, and she'd been impressed with her clarity of purpose and commitment to the cause. "Grace," Sarah said over coffee, "we've been watching you. Your rejection of Neuromed hasn't gone unnoticed. We're with you 100%. And not just us. The seniors in our community are rallying behind you too. People trust you because you've shown time and time again that you care about their privacy, their rights. You can count on us to support your bill." Grace felt a rush of relief. For the first time in days, she was reminded of why she was doing this in the first place. The people. The seniors who had faced exploitation and abuse in the healthcare system, who had their data sold without their knowledge or consent, who were left behind by technological advances that didn't consider their needs. They were the reason she was in this fight. "We need your support more than ever," Grace said, her voice steady. "But we're going to need a strong public campaign. People need to understand why this bill matters and why I can't compromise. Neuromed has the resources, But we have the people. Sarah smiled, her eyes bright with determination. We've got your back, Grace. Let's make sure everyone knows why this bill is so important. As the days passed, Grace worked tirelessly with Sarah and the coalition of digital rights groups. Together, they began organizing a grassroots campaign aimed at raising awareness about the dangers of unregulated AI and the misuse of personal data in healthcare. The campaign focused on stories from seniors who had been directly impacted by healthcare companies using their data without their consent. Grace also took to the press, appearing on talk shows, writing op-eds, and speaking at town halls. She talked about why rejecting corporate power was the only way to protect citizens. She framed the debate as one of individual rights versus corporate greed. The message resonated with a growing number of people, particularly older Americans who had spent their lives working hard, only to feel vulnerable to a system that no longer seemed to care about them. Meanwhile, the corporate pushback didn't stop. Neuromed continued to lobby behind the scenes, pulling strings and making calls to some of Grace's political allies. It wasn't long before a few key figures in her coalition began to waver. "I think we might be losing momentum," Megan had said in a phone call one evening. "There's talk of big money coming in from the other side. Neuromed's influence is too strong to ignore." Grace could feel the strain. Every time she took a step forward, it seemed like there were 2 steps back. The political machine was relentless, and it was clear that her refusal to compromise had set off a chain reaction she hadn't anticipated. But then, something unexpected happened. At a town hall in Detroit, Grace was approached by a senior woman named Eleanor, who spoke with a quiet but determined voice. "Thank you for fighting for us," Eleanor said. "I'm 72, and I've seen everything. I've been in this system long enough to know that people like us don't count for much in the eyes of these big companies. We're just numbers. But you make us feel like we matter. Don't stop." It was the kind of moment that made all the struggle feel worth it. Grace stood at the podium that night, looking out at the sea of faces. Seniors, the very people she had dedicated her life to protecting, were there, standing with her. They had become her most powerful allies. "Tonight, I make you this promise," Grace said, her voice filled with conviction. "I won't stop fighting for you. No matter the obstacles, no matter the pressure, we're in this together. And we will win." The next day, the public sentiment began to shift. News outlets that had once been critical of her stance started to give her credit for standing up to corporate power. Grassroots campaigns spread across social media, with seniors sharing their own stories of data misuse and calling for the protection of their privacy. Celebrities and influencers jumped on board, spreading the message of transparency and ethical healthcare to younger generations. As the bill moved closer to a final vote, Grace could feel the momentum building. The voices of activists, seniors, and concerned citizens were loud and clear. And while the opposition was still formidable, it was no longer about power. It was about people. The final vote was tight, but it passed. Grace's bill was officially law, marking a victory not just for her, but for the seniors and citizens who had rallied behind her. As she stood on the steps of the Capitol, surrounded by supporters, Grace felt a surge of gratitude. She had done it, not through power or influence, but by staying true to the values that had guided her from the beginning. It was a victory for integrity, a victory for people, and a victory for the future. In the end, Grace realized that sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most meaningful results. The Capitol was quiet that morning, a stark contrast to the whirlwind of activity that had followed the passage of Grace's bill. For the first time in months, Grace felt a sense of relief, but it was quickly tempered by the realization that while the bill was law, her work was far from over. In the weeks that followed, Neuromed and other tech giants had publicly accepted the new regulations, but Grace knew better. These companies had always been adept at finding loopholes, exploiting gray areas, and manipulating public opinion. The real battle was just beginning. The challenge now was ensuring the bill's implementation stayed true to its principles. Grace sat in her office, scrolling through a stack of reports detailing the early stages of the bill's implementation. Her phone buzzed, and a text popped up from Sophia. "How's everything going? I know you must be exhausted, but you're doing amazing work." Grace smiled, but the weight of the task ahead was pressing. She wasn't just dealing with one enemy now. She was up against an entire system that had been designed to prioritize profits over people. "It's just starting," she muttered to herself. Just as she was about to dive deeper into the reports, there was a knock at her door. It was Sarah Lee, the young activist who had become one of Grace's strongest allies throughout the campaign. "Got a minute?" Sarah asked, a folder in hand. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Grace gestured for Sarah to sit. "Take a look at this," Sarah said, placing the folder on Grace's desk. It contained a series of documents detailing several corporate lobbying efforts aimed at undermining the bill's implementation. Some of these tactics were subtle, others were more aggressive. But all of them were designed to dilute the bill's impact. "I knew this was coming," Grace sighed, rubbing her temples. "But seeing it in black and white, well, it's a reminder of what we're really up against." Sarah nodded, her expression serious. "We knew this wouldn't be easy. The real challenge now is making sure we don't lose the momentum." "The fight's not over, Grace." Grace looked out the window, her thoughts running wild. The past few months had been a blur of rallies, negotiations, and compromises. She had won a legislative battle, but in doing so, she had also become the target of powerful forces that stood to lose if the bill was enforced. Neuromed, for all its promises, wasn't going to sit idly by. "We can't let them weaken this," Grace said, determination setting in. "If we do, all of this was for nothing." Sarah gave a firm nod. "We'll need allies, more than just activists and grassroots organizations. We'll need people in Congress who are just as committed to keeping these corporations in check." Days later, Grace found herself in yet another heated meeting with Senator Michael Jacobs, a longtime ally who had helped her get the bill through the early stages. As they sat in a room filled with papers, reports, and laptops, the tension between them was palpable. "Grace, I've been in this business long enough to know that there are going to be trade-offs. I told you that when we started," Senator Jacobs said, his voice rising. "The bill is a victory, yes, but now we're dealing with the consequences. Neuromed isn't going to roll over quietly." Grace felt the familiar pang of frustration. Senator Jacobs, while supportive at times, had always been the type of politician who believed that compromise was the only way forward. But now, it seemed like he was willing to negotiate the bill's integrity just to keep the peace. "I didn't fight this hard to let them win through backdoor deals," Grace shot back. "We're not negotiating now. We're enforcing what we've worked for." Jacobs leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "I know, Grace. But remember, the corporate lobbyists are everywhere. They're powerful. You can't fight them all." Grace's voice softened. "I've been fighting them all my life, Michael, and I'm not stopping now." Later that week, Grace attended a community meeting in Pittsburgh, a city she had visited many times throughout her career. It was an important moment for her to reconnect with the people she had fought for. The seniors, the real people behind the bill, were there in force, and their enthusiasm was palpable. Grace spoke about the upcoming challenges and how she would need their continued support to keep the bill's enforcement strong. Their stories reminded her why she had fought so hard in the first place. Stories of overcharged medical bills, fraudulent diagnoses, and data theft filled the room. These were the faces she couldn't forget. One woman, in her late 70s, stood up, shaking slightly but with strength in her voice. "Don't let them take this from us, Grace," she said, looking directly at Grace. "We've trusted you. We've supported you. Don't let Neuromed and the rest of them make our lives harder again." The room erupted into applause. Grace's heart swelled. In that moment, she realized just how much this fight meant to so many people. She wasn't alone. Back in Washington, the political pressure to water down the bill intensified. The lobbying efforts from Neuromed and its allies had reached new heights, and Grace found herself in increasingly difficult negotiations. There were whispers of backroom deals, of concessions being made in exchange for corporate campaign donations and promises of future support. But for Grace, the moral high ground remained. She couldn't compromise on the protections for senior citizens. Not after everything she had seen, not after everything they had gone through. She received a call one evening from David Wu, the CEO of Neuromed, the very person who had once offered her that controversial deal. "Grace," his voice was smooth, almost condescending, "you're pushing too hard. You're only making things difficult for yourself, and for the seniors you claim to protect. There's a better way. A way where you don't have to be so stubborn. Grace's jaw tightened, but she remained calm. You're right about one thing, David. I am stubborn when it comes to protecting the people who trust me. We can work together, Grace, David persisted, his tone more insistent now. You can get everything you want, everything, if you just agree to a few small concessions. Trust me, I've been where you are. This will be a lot easier if we just come to an understanding. Grace's resolve hardened. The answer is still no, David. I won't sell out the people I'm fighting for. The line went dead, and Grace stood there, staring at her phone. The call had been a warning. David and his company weren't done. They would keep pushing, keep trying to wear her down. But she had one thing they didn't: the truth. Over the next few months, Grace kept her focus. She pushed back against every lobbying tactic, every backroom deal, and every attempt to water down the bill's provisions. She built alliances with ethics watchdogs, medical professionals, and consumer protection groups, all of whom understood that the fight wasn't just about policy, but about people's lives. In the end, it wasn't just about a single bill. It was about changing the culture of healthcare, about demanding accountability from the companies that held so much power over people's lives. And though the road ahead would be long, the foundation had been laid. Grace knew there would be more challenges to come. Neuromed wasn't going to give up easily, and the corporate forces were always waiting in the wings. But she had made a promise, to the seniors, to the vulnerable, to the everyday people who had put their faith in her. She wasn't backing down now. The early morning light spilled through Grace's office window, casting long shadows on the desk covered with papers, reports, and the occasional half-empty coffee cup. The quiet hum of the Capitol was broken only by the occasional footsteps in the hallway and the occasional rattle of emails hitting her inbox. For once, there was no noise of protesters or journalists. It felt like a brief respite before the storm. But the storm was coming. Grace knew that her bill had made a significant difference, but now, the real war was about to be waged. The corporate lobbyists had mobilized in full force, pulling every string and playing every card to undermine the regulations she had worked so hard to pass. And with it, the future of healthcare was at stake. Grace sat across from Sophia, her trusted advisor, in the small conference room near her office. It was a dimly lit room, with a large map of healthcare policies on the wall, dotted with markers and timelines. Sophia was reviewing the latest set of financial reports from the tech lobbyists, which showed an uptick in funding to opposition groups. It was clear that Neuromed wasn't done yet. We've got a week until the final vote on the implementation of the bill, Sophia said, glancing up from the papers. And the opposition is more organized than ever. They've already started swaying public opinion, pushing the narrative that your bill will lead to a collapse of the healthcare system. Grace exhaled slowly, leaning back in her chair. She had anticipated the opposition's next move: fearmongering. They were trying to convince the public that the new regulations would lead to longer wait times, more bureaucratic red tape, and fewer healthcare options. It was the oldest trick in the book: fear the unknown, and people would oppose change. Fear is their weapon, Grace said quietly, almost to herself. They're going to try and scare the public into thinking that big pharma and tech are the only ones who can provide a solution. But the truth is, there are alternative solutions, ones that actually prioritize people's health over profits. Sophia nodded, but the worry in her eyes was hard to miss. That's true, but you know how powerful those narratives are. It's going to take everything we have to make sure the truth gets through. Grace's mind raced. There was so much at stake now. She had worked for years to get this far, and she couldn't afford to let all her hard work unravel. The seniors who had stood by her needed her to finish this. The people who had trusted her vision needed to see it through to the end. We're not backing down, Grace said firmly. We have one chance to make sure this is implemented correctly. If we don't fight for transparency now, we'll lose it forever. The next few days were a whirlwind. Grace and her team worked day and night, strategizing, communicating with allies, and preparing for the final showdown. But this time, it wasn't just about rallying the usual suspects, the activists, the seniors, the grassroots organizations. This time, Grace would have to engage in a different kind of battle, one that would involve public relations, media strategy, and grassroots lobbying on an unprecedented scale. Grace met with Sarah Lee to plan the counterattack. We need to flip the narrative, Grace, Sarah said, tapping away at her laptop. The media is pushing the idea that your bill will collapse the system. But you know what? What if we framed it differently? What if we said that your bill is about building a new system? One that actually works for everyone, not just the rich and powerful. Grace's eyes lit up. Yes, empowerment. We don't just want to regulate. We want to restructure healthcare. We want a system that puts seniors, veterans, and low-income families first. We want to build a system where AI and technology work for people, not the other way around. Sarah nodded. Exactly. If we can get that message across, if we can show people that this isn't about tearing down the system, but rebuilding it, we'll have a real shot at winning public support. Grace smiled. Let's do it. Grace, Sarah, and the rest of the team spent the next few days coordinating a massive media campaign. They enlisted the help of influential journalists, medical professionals, and advocacy groups. They released a series of public statements, videos, and infographics highlighting the bill's core values: transparency, patient privacy, and ethical use of AI. But it wasn't just about the media. Grace's team also began organizing town halls, virtual meetings, and online petitions. They engaged with seniors, caregivers, and medical workers, the very people who would benefit from the bill. The message was clear. This bill would revolutionize healthcare, putting patients first and corporate interests second. As the days passed, Grace saw a shift in the public sentiment. Slowly but surely, the fear-mongering narrative started to lose its grip. Instead of seeing the bill as a threat, people began to see it as a lifeline. Grace knew that they were just scratching the surface. The opposition would keep pushing, but now the tide was starting to turn. The day of the final vote was tense. Grace sat in her office, surrounded by her team. They had worked so hard to get to this point, and now it all came down to this. Sophia entered with a set of last-minute reports. We've got a final count on the vote. It's going to be close. Grace nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. The bill had already passed through the House, but now it was in the hands of the Senate. She had no idea what the outcome would be, but she knew that she had given everything to this cause. It's out of our hands now, Grace said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. But we've done what we could. When the final results came through, Grace felt a wave of emotion wash over her. The bill had passed. The vote was narrow, but it didn't matter. The fight had been won. The room erupted in cheers. Sarah was the first to hug Grace. You did it. We did it. Grace smiled, her heart still racing. It's not over yet. We've got a lot of work ahead of us to make sure the bill is enforced. But this is a huge step forward. As Grace stood before the Capitol building later that evening, she couldn't help but reflect on the journey she had taken. The years of fighting, the moments of doubt, the corporate pressures, the sacrifice. It had all led her to this moment. The future of healthcare was still uncertain, but now, at least, there was hope. She had fought for seniors, for citizens, and for a healthcare system that was fair and transparent. The battle would continue, but Grace had laid the groundwork for real change. The following weeks after the final vote were a whirlwind of celebrations, press releases, and high-profile interviews. Grace couldn't recall the last time she had slept for more than a few hours at a stretch. But beneath the constant stream of media appearances and public acclaim, she knew this was just the beginning. The real challenge was ensuring that healthcare reform didn't just become a policy on paper, but a living, breathing reality for the people who needed it most. She sat alone in her office one quiet evening, the soft glow of the desk lamp illuminating her face. The weight of the task ahead felt heavier than ever. The bill had passed, yes, but the implementation process would require relentless oversight, advocacy, and a commitment to ensuring that no corporation, especially the likes of Neuromed, could derail the progress they'd fought so hard for. The phone rang, jolting her from her thoughts. She picked it up without hesitation. Grace. It was Sarah, her voice bright but tinged with exhaustion. You've been on the news all day. The public's excited, but we have some tough decisions ahead. We need to talk about the next steps. Grace leaned back in her chair, rubbing her eyes. I know. I feel it too. The pressure's going to keep building, and the corporations aren't just going to sit back and watch us transform the system. Over the next few months, Grace dove into the complex world of policy enforcement. The bill's framework had passed, but implementation was where the real power of the legislation would either succeed or fail. In Washington, a series of committees were tasked with the day-to-day aspects of enforcing the bill, ensuring that corporate interests did not exploit any of its provisions. Grace worked alongside Senator Jacobs and Congresswoman Miller, both of whom had become staunch supporters of the bill after seeing the positive response from their constituents. But despite the support in the legislature, the fight was far from over. The corporate lobbyists, backed by powerful healthcare conglomerates, had launched a full-scale campaign to delay, weaken, or even dismantle the bill's provisions. Their primary targets: the new regulations on AI healthcare technologies and data privacy. If those provisions were gutted, the bill's effectiveness would be severely compromised. Grace's heart raced as she sat in yet another hearing, this time with a room full of corporate representatives. They were making their case, using their typical tactics: lobbying, manipulation, and leveraging massive funding for political campaigns. But this time, Grace was ready. "I appreciate your concerns," Grace began, her voice calm but firm. "But let me be clear. We are not going to sacrifice patient safety or data privacy in the name of corporate profit. This bill is about ensuring that the healthcare system works for the people, not for the bottom line." One of the representatives from Neuromed, a man named Carlton Pierce, stood up, his tone smooth and practiced. "Grace, you've made quite a name for yourself with this bill, but we all know the reality. If you push these regulations too hard, we risk stalling innovation. Artificial intelligence and data-driven healthcare are the future, and over-regulating them now will only slow down progress. Do you want to be the person who held back life-saving technologies because of a flawed ideology?" Grace clenched her jaw but maintained her composure. She had heard this argument before. They were playing on fear, trying to convince her that without unchecked corporate control, innovation would come to a standstill. But Grace wasn't about to let that narrative win. Innovation doesn't come at the expense of people's lives, Carlton. Transparency, accountability, and ethics are the foundations of a healthy system. You can't expect people to trust technologies if their personal data is being sold for profit or if their healthcare decisions are being driven by algorithms designed to maximize shareholder returns. The room fell silent for a moment as Grace's words hung in the air. She had made her position clear. Corporate interests would no longer dictate the future of healthcare. It was a powerful moment, but she knew the battle wasn't won yet. They would push back, harder than ever. As the weeks turned into months, the changes began to be felt across the healthcare landscape. The first noticeable shift was in the transparency of healthcare pricing. Seniors who had once struggled to pay for medications now had access to clear pricing and a clearer understanding of what their healthcare choices would cost. Grace watched the stories pour in from across the country, people sharing how they were able to get the care they needed, how their prescriptions were more affordable, and how they no longer felt at the mercy of predatory healthcare practices. There was still a long way to go, but the system was starting to work for everyone. Meanwhile, Neuromed was continuing its aggressive campaign. But now, it wasn't just about corporate pushback, it was about public accountability. Grassroots organizations were rising up to support the bill's regulations. Technology experts, healthcare workers, and everyday citizens had begun to rally around the idea that technology should serve people, not exploit them. At a town hall in Chicago, Grace found herself face-to-face with an audience of concerned citizens. The room was packed, and their faces reflected both hope and anxiety. These were the people who would feel the impact of the bill most directly: the seniors, the caregivers, the veterans, the families struggling to navigate the complexities of healthcare. One elderly woman stood up and asked, "Grace, how can we be sure that these corporations won't just find another way to get around these laws? How do we know they won't find new ways to charge us extra or sell our data to the highest bidder?" Grace nodded, understanding the skepticism. "We've built a framework that's designed to evolve, to address the loopholes they'll inevitably try to exploit. But we also have a national network of watchdogs, advocates, and consumers who will be watching every step of the way. The key here is transparency. If the public sees something wrong, they can call it out." The crowd applauded, a clear sign of trust in Grace's leadership. And in that moment, she realized how much the world had changed. People weren't just relying on the government or the corporations to shape their future. They were actively shaping it themselves. Months later, the first reviews of the bill's impact began to surface. Independent researchers and policy experts praised the bill for its balance between regulation and innovation. Healthcare costs had started to drop, and data privacy violations had decreased significantly. More importantly, people felt more empowered in their healthcare decisions than ever before. However, Grace knew the work wasn't over. This was just the beginning. The system was starting to change, but it still had deep-rooted issues that needed addressing. Health disparities, access to mental health care, and the growing reliance on AI were just a few of the challenges still on the horizon. But for now, Grace allowed herself a moment of peace. She had fought the good fight, and she had seen real change happen. The system wasn't perfect, but it was getting better. And in that, she saw hope for the seniors who had inspired her, for the vulnerable populations who had been left behind, and for future generations who would benefit from the work she had done. Grace stepped out of her office one evening, watching the sunset over the Capitol. It had been a long and difficult journey, but as she stood there, she couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. The battle for healthcare reform was not over, but she had taken the first crucial step toward ensuring that no one would ever again have to suffer at the hands of a broken system. The changes she had fought for were now embedded into the very fabric of American healthcare. Grace smiled. The fight had been long, but it had been worth it. The future of healthcare was brighter, and now it was in the hands of the people. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?